following the January 1st, 2021 deadline set by SB 380, which instructs the CPUC to require a specified range of working gas in the storage field. As that legislation expires, the Commission will need to decide how to handle the range of working gas in the storage field. The interim decision that's going to come out in the next few days does not consider the analysis you see here today, since this is the first time the parties will have had a chance to see and weigh in on this analysis. So there will be plenty of opportunity for you to provide input on today's results before we reach a more longer range final decision on the storage level. These results also set us up nicely for the third phase of this proceeding, which has been underway for a few months now. As many of you know, we've contracted with an independent expert consultant to develop scenarios that explore how to modify the existing system if the Commission were to decide to replace the Aliso Canyon facility. The consultant will be able to build on many of the modeling assumptions covered today, which reflect, as we have discussed, analysis of future gas demand in the future. So with that, I will hand it back to Energy Division staff to get started, and thanks for participating in this workshop.
Okay, this workshop is the fourth technical workshop in the Aliso OII. My name is Donald Brooks, and I'm going to introduce two of my team members who are going to present their analysis regarding sensitivity results, 1 in 35 hydraulic modeling results, and feasibility study results. We have the Energy Resource Modeling team. This is the Energy Division, PUC. This workshop is WebEx only, and it's October 15, 2020. Lisa, can you move the slide forward one? Thank you. Thank you. Today's agenda, 9:45 intro, ground rules, review, purpose, and goals. Commissioner Randolph just gave an introduction. My name is Donald Brooks. I'm supervisor of the modeling team. We're going to go over a review of the Phase 2 schedule and order of the modeling steps. That's me too. At 10 o'clock or before, if we get through this quickly, we're going to start the sensitivities on winter 2030 1 in 10 hydraulic modeling. And that's Lisa Cosby, who's a regulatory analyst with the Energy Resource Modeling team. Then there'll be a break after Lisa's presentation, after the Q&A for Lisa's presentation, and we'll go into 135 extreme peak demand with minimum local generation, and that's Khalid Abdelaziz, who's a utilities engineer on my team as well, and we'll do Q&A for that, and then we'll take lunch. Then it'll be 1 o'clock to 2:30 will be feasibility study results and storage inventory proposal, and that's again Khalid and Christina who's a regulatory analyst on the gas team. Then there'll be another short Q&A, and then we'll wrap up and go to next steps. Lisa, could you advance the slide, please? Workshop logistics, same stuff. Commissioner Randolph is the host as well as Energy Division staff. Safety, note surroundings, and emergency exits where you are. Do an ergonomics check. This is all the WebEx information. Again, the workshop is being recorded. Lisa, could you advance the slide, please? Workshop logistics, those are what the buttons do. Raise your hand if you have a question. Questions will be read aloud by staff, and reminder that you're going to mute yourself again after the question. Please submit questions for speakers in the chat box or raise your hand to be unmuted by staff. Today's presentations are all posted to the Aliso OII website right there at the link. Could you advance the slide, Lisa? Discussing logistics, workshop is structured to stimulate honest dialogue and engage different perspectives. We're keeping comments friendly and respectful, and the chat feature is only for Q&A or technical issues. Please don't start or respond to sidebar conversations. This is held WebEx events. If you're hearing me speak, you got in right, you got in correctly, and everyone is muted at the beginning of the webinar. Speakers are asked to state their name and their organization before speaking. And if you want to speak during the Q&A time, please send your questions to the moderator via the chat feature or via email. And I also think we mentioned something about raising hands in the previous slide. So I think there's multiple avenues to get yourself heard during the Q&A times. Thank you very much for participating, and please advance the slide, Lisa. Workshop scope, making clear what's in scope and what's not in scope. What's in scope is all phase 2 issues, including the staff analysis that we presented before and the staff analysis we're presenting today. For the new maximum Aliso Canyon storage capacity without a scope is the proposed decision, which Commissioner Randolph mentioned on interim storage level of Aliso Canyon and phase 3 issues. We will have a phase 3 workshop talking, sort of introducing analysis and early results on November 17, talking about the phase 3 issues that will be presented by our consultant staff. And that'll be on November 17th. Lisa, could you advance the slide, please? Workshop objectives, information sharing, trying to review the work that we've done, these 3 big topics. And then we're going to solicit feedback, answer questions from parties, and promote open, informal discussion. And Lisa, if you could please advance the slides. Review of objectives, phases of the proceeding. Just to make sure we review this, PUC opened the investigation pursuant to SB 380, determine the feasibility of minimizing or eliminating the use of the Aliso Canyon natural gas storage facility while maintaining energy and electric system reliability. The PUC staff has or have engaged in an extensive stakeholder process to evaluate the effects of minimizing or eliminating Aliso, and the PUC published a final scenarios framework. They're linked on January 4, 2019, which described the overall sequence and process of studies. In that scenarios framework was introduced in phase 1, and it described what we're going to do in phase 2, which we here are showing you today. Please advance. More about the phases of the proceeding. The scenarios framework sought to answer the following questions, just reminding us what the central questions were. Is the Aliso Canyon storage field needed for reliability? And if so, what's the minimum inventory level required? What are the cost and affordability impacts to gas and electric customers if the Aliso storage field is closed or operated at reduced inventory? This phase 2 workshop presents results of studies designed to identify the gaps or the needs that could result if Aliso Canyon is minimized or eliminated, given the gas infrastructure currently in place and current statutes, rules, and regulations. Once we identify these gaps, a new maximum Aliso Canyon storage capacity will be determined, and we can begin to discuss what changes could be made in phase 3. Please advance the slide. Finally, we're moving to the next topic in the agenda, the review of the phase 2 schedule and order of modeling steps. This will be quick. Workshop 3 we gave on July 28, 2020, and it showed 1 in 10 hydraulic modeling results as well as production cost modeling results. Then we issued a ruling we're going to issue a ruling issuing the economic analysis report. It's imminent, ready to be issued. Opening and reply comments on the economic analysis report will, of course, be rescheduled to happen once the report is issued. Workshop 4, which is today, is not in September. It's on October 15. All those things, those dates have changed since the issuance of this schedule. What I mean to show you here, though, is that Workshop 4 is today, October 15. The next 3 items there the ruling issuing production cost modeling and hydraulic modeling report, as well as the opening reply comments on the reports, and the proposed decision adopting modeling reports all are set to happen in the next quarter, within the next couple months here. So it's coming to the end, and we are in Q4 of 2020. And so these are the steps that are upcoming. Okay, please advance the slide. I think that's the end of my time to speak. So do we want to stop for a couple of minutes of Q&A here before we start Lisa's presentation? What do you think, Christina?
Sure, we can do that since we're ahead of schedule. If you have any questions, please enter your question into the chat, or you can use the raise hand feature to be unmuted.
Does anyone have any questions over the status of where we are, the phase 2 schedule, or any of the objectives that we've gone over? Okay, well.
There is one question, a question from Nora Sheriff. Nora asks, do you have a sense of when the ruling with the report will come out?
We are drafting it right now. It's well into its drafting. We're reviewing drafts. We, of course, have to add the material that we present today to the report. So the sense is probably, I'd say Q4 2020. I'm confident that Q4 2020, the ruling with the reports go out. So that's not, a long time away. It's probably, maybe a month, 6 weeks from now, something like that. And then there'll be comments and reply comments following that, and then a proposed decision adopting the modeling reports after that. So we're pretty confident that it'll be Q4 2020.
Thank you, Donald. I don't see further questions.
Excellent. Just wanted to give people a chance to ask questions. So let's move on to Lisa Cosby, who's an analyst in the Energy Resource Modeling team, and her work doing some sensitivities based on Simulation 5 in winter 2030. Take it away, Lisa.
All right, good morning. I'm Lisa Cosby, and I'm going to be presenting. We're starting here on slide 11. And this will focus on Simulation 5, winter 2030, and the sensitivities that we did on that. Slide 12, I'm going to be first reviewing the 1 in 10 hydraulic modeling case. 1 in 10 refers to the coldest winter day in a 10-year period. And this was done for winter 2030. I'm going to go over the inputs, the sensitivities, and then we'll have the conclusions and Q&A. We'll pause midway through for some questions, and I'll be going through slide 37. So now slide 13. First, I'm going to review SoCalGas's simulation winter 2030. This was presented at our July 28th workshop. We presented 6 simulations at that workshop, and I'll go over those and the reason why we're focusing today on the 5th simulation. The 5th simulation was the only one that allowed Aliso Canyon withdrawals. It used 90% non-Aliso inventories, and that means at the fields that are on Rancho, La Goleta, and Playa del Rey, we assumed 90% inventory levels. And then Item 1D, we determined the Aliso withdrawal rate at these non-Aliso inventory levels. And the above is called the base case. So the original version done by SoCalGas is our base case. Item 2, I'm going to present our sensitivities on simulation 5. So we used the non-Aliso inventory levels of 37%, 50%, and 70% instead of the 90% that we used in the base case. So we determined the Aliso withdrawal rate and inventory levels at these 3 reduced non-Aliso inventory levels. So moving to slide 14, this is a review of the 6 simulations that we presented at the July 28th workshop. Again, the 1 in 10 refers to the coldest winter day in a 10-year period. Simulation 1 through 6 included 2 for 2020, 2 for 2025, and 2 for 2030. We did a winter and summer for each of those years. And the weather conditions were, for the winter, we were using the 1 in 10 reliability standard. And that standard means that there can be no curtailment of core or non-core customers. So going down the results, the Aliso Canyon withdrawal rate, we set these up so that no withdrawals were allowed except for simulation 5, where the result was that the withdrawal rate needed was 520 million cubic feet a day. Going down the column of success or failure of the simulation, some of these failed for various reasons. The first one was the line pack was not recovered, and I'll be going over that in more detail later. The line pack is the amount of gas present in the pipeline system, and in this case, the simulation failed because it was not recovered by the end of the simulation. Moving down the list, we're focusing on the 5th one because that did allow Aliso Canyon withdrawal, and it was a successful simulation, just with some small minimum operating pressure violations in the San Joaquin Valley, which I'll go over later as well. So again, this is review of July 28th workshop. Moving to slide 15. The simulation is based on a scenario of certain supply, pipeline infrastructure, demand, and storage capabilities. This was designed to test the level of Aliso Canyon withdrawal that would be required on a 1 in 10 winter day based on winter 2030. This does not analyze multiple cold days or a cold year. The feasibility study presented later today will address multiple cold days. So the 1 in 10 reliability standard addresses the 1 cold winter day. And again, this allowed Aliso Canyon withdrawal. So moving on to slide 16, this shows the pipeline supplies that we used. You can see on the map in the table, the northern zone includes Needles and South Needles, which is Topak and Kramer Junction. The southern zone includes Blythe, Ehrenberg, and Otay Mesa, which is down near the Mexican border. And then we have the Wheeler Ridge zone in the north, the west, and then the California producers in the north coastal zone. We used 85% pipeline utilization in the northern and southern zones and 100% in the Wheeler Ridge zone. And moving on to slide 17, This is another map of the zones and the receipt points, and this also shows the Los Angeles basin where the circle is, and this is just showing how the gas flows toward the Los Angeles basin where most of the customer demand is, and you'll see that most of the storage fields are near the Los Angeles basin or in it as well. And so slide 18 shows the demand that we used in the base case for core customers, which are the residential and small commercial customers. We used the demand of 3,034 million cubic feet a day. And this was based on the SoCalGas forecast. You can see here the non-electric generation, non-core, of 664.6 MMCFD. This was also the SoCalGas forecast. And then finally, the electric generation forecast. This is the natural gas for the power plants that use natural gas to produce electricity. So this was the forecast based on CPUC production cost modeling that was gone over in depth in the July 28th workshop as well. So we have our total demand of 4,821 MMCFD, our pipeline supply of 3,115 MMCFD from an earlier page, and the difference is 1,706, which is the customer demand in excess of the pipeline supply, and this difference needs to be made up from storage withdrawals. All right, so slide 19. These are the storage capabilities that we used in the base case. So for the natural gas fields, these are the maximum withdrawal rates based on 90% inventory levels. And in the first column, you see the maximum withdrawal rate. And in the far right column, these are the results from the simulation. So the Aliso Canyon withdrawal rate was 520 million cubic feet a day. And the other fields had their withdrawal rates held constant at the 90% inventory level. Moving on to slide 20, this is a storage field map, just to give you an understanding of where these are. The Aliso Canyon and much smaller Playa del Rey storage fields are in the LA Basin, and then Honor Rancho and La Goleta are a bit outside the LA Basin. Now, slide 21, the key results of Simulation 5 that was conducted by SoCalGas and presented in July were that to meet the forecast for the winter 2030 coldest day in 10 years, demand would be met by using pipeline supply of 3,115 and storage withdrawals of 1,849 million cubic feet a day. With inventory levels of 90% at the non-Aliso storage fields, the required withdrawal rate from Aliso Canyon would be 520 MMCFD. So this slide introduces, slide 22 introduces the Simulation 5 sensitivities. So we ran the Synergy natural gas model for Simulation 5 with 3 non-Aliso inventory levels, 37%, 50%, and 70%. The inventory levels decrease throughout the winter as gas is withdrawn to meet demand. By the end of the winter, the non-Aliso natural gas storage fields inventory levels have averaged 67% in February from 2017 to 2020. So toward the end of the winter season, the non-Aliso fields inventory was 37% in late February 2019. So this gives a sense of how we selected these inventory levels to run our sensitivities on. So now I'm going to pause for questions before we get into the sensitivities a little bit more.
Thank you, Lisa. We do have one question from Norman Peterson. Norman's asking about slide 14 and why it doesn't show the simulation 5 that was presented on July 28th, which assumed Aliso withdrawal at 1265.
So slide 14, the 1265 Aliso Canyon withdrawal rate would have been the maximum possible given the 90% Aliso Canyon inventory level as a starting point, but the results of the simulation showed a 520 withdrawal rate. So I think I have another slide where I have those lined up next to each other. Slide 19. This is showing the maximum withdrawal rates in the middle column, and then the far right column is the results of the simulation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question from Edward Bedners, who's raised his hand. Mr. Bedners, you're unmuted.
Hi, I actually put it in the chat. Looking at the average 67% on slide 22 for non-Aliso, just curious, what is the actual range that y'all had over those years? Do you know?
I don't have that handy right now. You're wondering what the range was by year?
Right, from 2017 to 2020. I just wondered if there was a wide range and that average was in the middle, or if it fluctuated slightly around that average.
Oh, yes, I don't have that readily available, but that is something that I think I could provide later.
Okay. Just my thought is that using the lowest of the three might have been a more conservative approach, but if it's a tight range, that wouldn't matter. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question from Marcel Hoeger. The question is the 1 in 10 a cold and dry criterion or just temperature?
My understanding is it's just temperature, but I would invite the gas policy team to weigh in on that if that's not correct.
Hi, this is Christina. Is your question asking about the 1 in 10, when we say a 1 in 10 demand day? Is that what your question is referring to? Because in the California gas report, we do look at a 1 in 10 cold and dry criteria.
Yeah, this is Khaled here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So I'm going to remind everyone that EG numbers here in SIM 5 were coming from our own modeling, from the production cost modeling. So this is based on picking the 90th percentile among 100 permutations for 20 weather years and 5 load uncertainty or uncertainty in the forecasts. So it's the 90th percentile. I don't know if Donald wants to add anything to that or not.
This is Jean. I was just going to add, I think cold and dry is for the seasonal numbers in the California gas report, I don't think it's necessarily for the 1 in 10 day.
Thank you. We have another question from Norman Peterson. Mr. Peterson, I've unmuted you.
Thank you, Christina. Excuse me. I have a question about what you're showing in your slides today about simulation 5 in comparison to what you presented or what LANL presented on July 28th. LANL slide 12 showed what you're showing is the maximum withdrawal rate of 1265 at Aliso Canyon. That the slide 12 on 728 showed 1,265 MMCFD of withdrawal at Aliso Canyon. And then when the LANL presenter got to slide 14 for simulation 5, in the box for the line labeled pressures above minimum operating pressure, there was a no indicating SO5 failed. And again, that was with 1,265 MMCFD of withdrawal at Aliso Canyon. And now today, you're saying that there wouldn't be a failure with the withdrawal down to 520 MMCFD. And we have over on the side in a little box something about how there'd be some minimum pressure problems in the South San Joaquin Valley, which is quite a mystery, by the way, at the July 28th workshop. And the way we left the San Joaquin Valley was that would be looked into by SoCalGas. So could you help me understand, could you help me walk from what LANL was presenting on July 28, which very clearly assumed 1,265 MMCFD withdrawal capacity at Aliso Canyon, and how you get to simulation 5 that shows success in bold for Aliso Canyon at 520 MMCFD withdrawal.
All right, so the result of the Sim 5 that Los Alamos presented was that the Aliso Canyon withdrawal rate was 520, and I'm looking for that in their slide deck.
That would be slide, let me help you, it would be a slide 12 in the LANL slide deck. Slide 12.
Yeah, I see the maximum withdrawal rate of 1,265. But the resulting withdrawal rate from their simulation was 520. Again, I'm looking for the page where that is appearing in their presentation. The minimum operating pressure violations in the San Joaquin Valley occurred in their simulation and in the base case I'm talking about today. Those did recover from the violations during the 30 hours. They were considered minor enough that they weren't considered a failure for the whole simulation.
So you're saying that even though the LANL showed the maximum withdrawal rate as being what would be assumed for SO5, namely the 1,265 MMCFD, the simulation 5 actually used 520 MMCFD. So that 1,265 shown on LANL's slide 12 was basically a little misleading.
Well,
yeah, that's true.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's true, Norm. I'm sorry if there was any confusion. The 1265 is what we allowed the modelers to do in order to withdraw from SoCal. That was the maximum allowed for the purpose of the simulation. But when they performed the simulation, we asked them to minimize the withdrawal rate, so they end up using only 520. And if you add the total on that slide, and look at slide 12 still from LANL, the total supplies from the storage is only 2.5. Add that to the pipeline supply of 3.1, and you have way more than you need. You have 5.6 actually, right? So this is the allowed maximum. I'm sorry if it was misleading, but they ended up using only 5.20. Yeah.
If you look on slide 33.
Your slide 33 for today?
No, the Los Alamos presentation from July 28th.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a graph. There's a graph that shows a red line for the Aliso withdrawal rate.
Okay,
and it's at 520. I think they verbally said that during the presentation. Okay,
well, thank you. I don't want to burden it anymore. I might have missed that, but certainly for purposes of the comments that SCPUC submitted on the workshop, our understanding was that SO5 was using the 1265 as presented on slide 12. So your clarification today is very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I do not see any further questions.
Okay, so we're going to move on to slide 24. So slide 24 is a preview of the results of the sensitivities, and I will be presenting detail in the following slides. But just to give you a sense of the results, sensitivity 1, using a non-Aliso inventory of 70%, the Aliso Canyon maximum withdrawal rate was 830 million cubic feet a day, and this was associated with an Aliso Canyon inventory of 13 BCF. Sensitivity 2, with a non-Aliso inventory at 50%, this would be for Playa del Rey, La Goleta, and Ana Rancho, the Aliso Canyon withdrawal rate would be 1,010 mmCFD, and this would be associated with an inventory of 20 BCF. And finally, for the third sensitivity with the lowest non-Aliso inventory of 37%, the Aliso Canyon withdrawal rate would be 1,160 mmCFD, and this would be associated with an Aliso Canyon inventory of 27 BCF. And just as a point of reference, the current authorized maximum inventory level at Aliso Canyon is 34 BCF. So now I'm going to present more detail on the sensitivities. Slide 25 shows the inputs, and we have our input categories. For pipeline supply, the base case used 3,115 million cubic feet a day, as shown above. Each of the sensitivities, 1, 2, and 3, use the same supply. There were just small adjustments on the levels based on the synergy model steady state, but they're essentially the same as the base case in total. And then the pipeline infrastructure shown on slide 16 above was the same, was used in each sensitivity, and this included an 85% pipeline utilization factor in the northern and southern zones, and 100% utilization factor in the Wheeler Ridge zone. For customer demand, we have the 4,821 million cubic feet a day. And again, the same was used in each of the three sensitivities. And finally, for storage capabilities, this is the input that we changed, reducing from 90% to 70 to 50%, and then finally to 37%. Slide 26 lays out the criteria for a simulation success. So a success would mean that the combination of inputs would produce a workable result. And these were also outlined in our July 28th presentations, and they're also in the scenarios framework that's in the CPUC website in our source note below. So first, the criteria is the pressures remained above the minimum operating pressures. The second, the customer demand was met and regulators operated within rated capacities. Third, the pressures remained below the maximum operating pressures. 4, the line pack was recovered. And as you can see in note A, the line pack is the gas present in the pipelines throughout the pipeline system. There are over 100,000 miles of pipeline in the SoCalGas system. The line pack being restored means that the amount of gas present in the pipeline at the end of the simulation is approximately equal to the amount of gas at the beginning of the simulation, which guarantees that each operating day does not impose any constraints on future days. The simulation is a 24-hour period that represents a full gas day. And finally, the 5th criteria is that the storage fields maintain pressure. So now we're on slide 27, and this is going to show us the results of the first sensitivity with the non-Aliso fields at 70% inventory. This slide shows the loads, the supplies, and the line pack. And it shows, well, the result was that 830 million cubic feet a day are needed from Aliso. I'm going to go over this graph in some detail because you'll see it again, and it's a little bit complicated. The x-axis shows 24 hours from 6 a.m. through 6 a.m. the next day, which is represented by hour 30. You'll see midnight is hour 24. The y-axis has 3 axes. The innermost one is the loads or customer demands, and this is shown in the black dashed line. And these are in negative numbers. And you'll see that there's a peak in the morning at 7 a.m. And that's consistent with winter heating and cooking in the morning. The demand decreases during the day, and then in the early afternoon, it starts to increase again, and there's a evening peak at 1800 hours, or about 6 p.m. And about that time, the non-core load decreases. So the middle y-axis is the supplies, and this is shown in the green dashed line. And this is the supplies from pipelines and storage withdrawals. And finally, the outer left y-axis is the line pack. And this is shown in the blue dashed line. And you'll see at time 6, which is circled, the line pack is about 2,660 million standard cubic feet. And if you go across the graph to the circled line pack in times 30, it's approximately restored to the same level. So now we're going to slide 28. And this shows the same information for sensitivity 1, and it's overlaid with the base case. So you can see how our sensitivity compares with the base case, which is using 90% non-Aliso inventories. So starting with the system sum of loads, which is in the black dashed line, and the system sum of loads from the base case, which is in the red dotted line, those two lines are superimposed on each other because they're the same for the base case and this sensitivity. Looking at the green lines, the sensitivity is the lighter green dashed line, and the base case is the darker green. And this graph is showing us that in the first 24 hours, up to hour 24, the sensitivity is higher than the base case. And then once we get past hour 24, the combination of storage and pipeline supplies are lower than the base case. And then the blue lines are the line pack, and they follow the same general trends, the dark blue being the sensitivity and the light aqua being the base case. And in each one of them, they're restored to their original level by the end of the simulation. Okay, now we're moving on to slide 29. This shows the minimum operating pressure results in the San Joaquin Valley, and this is showing us that across the bottom we have time again. The lines represent nodes that are locations on the pipeline system, and the node names are confidential. The actual pressures are also confidential, but the y-axis represents the pressures. And this shows that between hour 8 and 9 a.m., some of the pressures dip down, and it shows that they do recover by the end of the 24-hour simulation. Slide 30, this is showing us the summary of results of sensitivity 1. So criteria 1, did the pressures remain above the minimum operating? Yes, there were 9 exceptions in the San Joaquin Valley, all of which returned during the simulation, returned from their violations. The demand was met. Item 2, the supply exceeded the demand. Item 3, did the pressures remain below their maximum operating pressures? Yes, there were 2 nodes that exceeded their maximum pressures by minor amounts, and 1 did not return from a minor violation. But this was not significant enough to stop the criteria from being met. Number 4 was the line pack was recovered, and I've put here the million standard cubic feet at times 6 and times 30. And then number 5, the storage fields maintained their pressures. Comparing times 6 to times 30, they were essentially the same. So now we're moving on to slide 31, and I'm going to show similar slides as I just did for the sensitivity 1. This is the result of sensitivity 2 with the non-Aliso inventory at 50%. So as we have less on hand in the Playa del Rey, La Goleta, and Ana Rancho fields, more is needed from Aliso, and the results showed that 1,010 MMCFD were needed from Aliso. And this graph shows the loads in the black and the red line, the black being this sensitivity, the red being the base case, are superimposed on each other because they're the same. The supplies in the green lines, again, show that there is some more withdrawal, a higher withdrawal rate in the sensitivity than the base case until hour 24. And then after hour 24, the sensitivity has a lower line than the base case. The blue lines show the line pack, again, following the trend, following along with the demand, and they are restored by the end of the 30-hour simulation. Now we're moving on to slide 32. Again, we have some minimum operating pressure dipping below their minimum operating levels in the San Joaquin Valley between 8 and 9 a.m. Again, these return to acceptable levels by the end of the simulation. Now, slide 33, we're showing the summary of criteria for success or failure. And again, very similar to the sensitivity one, the pressures, minimum operating pressures, there were some exceptions, but they did return from their violations to acceptable levels. The customer demand was met. Item 3, pressures were below the maximum operating pressures. There were 2 nodes that exceeded maximum pressures by minor amounts, and 1 did not return from a minor violation, but this was not significant enough to stop the criteria from being met. Number 4, the line pack was recovered. And number 5, the storage fields maintained pressure. Now we're on slide 34 and our final and third sensitivity results. So with the non-Aliso field at 37%, the withdrawal rate needed from Aliso Canyon would be 1,160 million cubic feet a day. And you can see similarly with the earlier charts, the loads are the same in this sensitivity in the black line as in the base case with the red line. Those are superimposed on each other. The supplies, again, in the sensitivity, the supplies are in the light green line, and they are higher than the base case until hour 24. And then they dip below the base case after hour 24. The line pack follows a similar trend, the base case and the sensitivity in the blue lines, and in each case, the line pack is restored by the end of the 30-hour simulation. Now we're on slide 35. And I'm showing the San Joaquin Valley pressures. Again, we have a similar result between hours 8 and 9 a.m. And the pressures do recover from their minimum operating pressure violations by the end of the simulation. And now we're on page 36. This is the summary of the results of the lowest non-Aliso inventory levels that we used in this simulation. So again, there were some minor violations of minimum operating pressures, but they did return from the violations. Item 2, the demand was met. Item 3, there were 4 nodes that exceeded the maximum pressures by minor amounts, and 1 did not return from a minor violation. But this was not significant enough to keep this criteria from being met. Item 4, the line pack was recovered. And item 5, the storage fields maintained their pressures. And now we're on slide 37, our conclusions. So the sensitivities on simulation 5 resulted in the following Aliso Canyon withdrawal rates and inventory levels. Sensitivity 1 with the non-Aliso inventory of 70% showed an Aliso Canyon maximum withdrawal rate of 830 mmCFD and an Aliso Canyon inventory of 13 BCF. Sensitivity 2 with a lower non-Aliso inventory level of 50%, more Aliso Canyon withdrawals were needed, 1,010, and a 20 BCF inventory. And finally, at the lowest inventory that we modeled for non-Aliso at 37%, we had Aliso Canyon withdrawal rate of 1,160 mmCFD, and the Aliso Canyon inventory associated with that would be 27 BCF. So the base case showed that Aliso withdrawals were required even with the non-Aliso fields 90% full. So at even lower non-Aliso inventories, greater Aliso withdrawals would be needed, and the levels were determined by the sensitivities. Item 3, the simulations based on a 1 in 10 winter cold day showed that an Aliso inventory of 27 BCF would be needed, and this is given actual recent inventories. And number 4, the above sensitivities analyzed a one-time cold day to determine the recommended Aliso inventory level. The feasibility study, which is presented next, analyzes multiple cold days. So with that, I am going to stop and open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. We have a question from Catherine Elder, who asks if the values on slide 24 came from SoCalGas.
Okay, let's go back to slide 24. The values on slide 24, which are the results, actually came, the Aliso Canyon withdrawal rates and inventory came from the synergy model. So this was a result of running all these inputs through the model. So when we put all these inputs
Lisa,
in, go ahead.
It was CPUC staff though that ran the model in this case, correct?
Yes, yes. Yes, SoCalGas ran the 90% base case, and then we CPUC staff ran the sensitivities.
Thank you, Lisa. The next question is from Norman Peterson, who asks, what is the source of the info that SoCalGas line pack is 2660 mmCF?
This is also from the synergy model. Let me go to a slide where. So when we run synergy, one of the outputs is this chart, and it's a result of all the calculations that go on during the simulation as a result of the supplies and the demands. So that's not something we put in. It's an output of synergy.
Thank you, Lisa. Edward Bedners has his hand raised. Mr. Bedners, you've been unmuted.
Hi, just to clarify, I'm with DNBGL, the consulting firm, on behalf of the independent shippers. Just wanted to be sure I'm clear on this. In number 3 on slide 37, it said actual recent inventories, and then the required inventory was 27. So I just want to be sure. So up at the table, sensitivity 3, that means that the actual recent inventories were 37%?
The actual non-Aliso inventories were 37% as an average in February 2019.
And
so
that's
the average of honor.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, that's great. I shouldn't have interrupted. I'll let you finish.
Yes, the 37% was the average at Honor Rancho, Playa del Rey, and La Goleta in February 2019 on a couple of days that month.
Okay, just wanted to be sure I had that right. Thank you.
This is Jean. I just wanted to add to that a little bit. One of the reasons we wanted to include those numbers is what we saw in that year was that Honor Rancho was depleted a lot more than the other storage wells. So we actually put in the real numbers from the different fields so that we could model how the distribution actually was in that year.
No, that was terrific. I'm really appreciative of that. I just wanted to make sure I understood that association. Thanks.
Thank you. Norman Peterson has a follow-up question to his original question, and it's how consistently is the line pack at 2660 mmCF?
All right, so it varies a little bit. I'm showing slide 36 where it's at the end and the beginning of the simulation, it was 2637. So 2,637 million standard cubic feet. And it's compared to the 70%, which was 2660. It hovers around in that range. I can go back up to the 50%. The 50% level line pack was 2647.
Thank you. The next question is from Kathy Yap. Miss Yap, you're unmuted.
Yes, I had a question about, I think it's slide 37, where you have the results for the sensitivities listed, the conclusions. Yeah. The Aliso Canyon inventory levels you list, do you know whether those are the minimum inventories that are required to produce that withdrawal rate? That's, for example, sensitivity 3, the 1160 number for the withdrawal rate. You need is that a minimum or an average for the associated inventory?
I think you could consider that a minimum in that you would need to have at least that much in there to have the withdrawal rate of 1160. So you couldn't go below that 27 and still get a withdrawal rate of 1160.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. The next question is from Jason Egan, who asks, is Energy Division suggesting that there would need to be a requirement that SoCalGas maintain certain minimum Aliso inventories throughout the winter? Does this assume certain Aliso withdrawals in November through January, and that SoCalGas would need to have 27 BCF in Aliso for February?
So this does indicate that Aliso would need to have 27 BCF in February if, like in 2019, there were a very cold day. yeah, the situation, if you could repeat the question about what would need to happen in the earlier months, please.
Actually, could I jump in? I think, yeah. So this is what you would need on a 1 in 10 day, peak day, which typically happens in December or January, although we have seen quite cold weather at the beginning of February. So in the feasibility study, we're going to be talking more about what you would need to make sure that you still had that much gas in storage when a peak day hit, whenever that happened to be within the winter. So I think we will be addressing this question in more detail in one of the later presentations.
Thank you, Jean and Lisa. Our next question is from Catherine Elder, who asks, you have a couple of simulations with the MAOP violations and concluded that simulation was successful. Could you elaborate on how you concluded the excessive pressure did not matter?
The pressure, the excessive pressure was quite minor. We're talking about maybe 2 pounds per square inch out of, say, 700. And so it was a very minor percent. And I think that some slight tweaks could be made to the system in order to avoid those errors.
Thank you. And she asked a follow-up question. Could you elaborate on how you modeled the relationship between inventory and withdrawal?
So the inventory and withdrawal that you're seeing on slide 37, the model gives us the withdrawal rate, the synergy model. The inventory associated with that is based on a formula. It's a confidential with inventory withdrawal rate curve that SoCalGas provided. And so we applied that curve, that withdrawal rate curve, to determine the inventory level. So the actual inventory in BCF was not an output of the synergy model, but the withdrawal rate was.
Thank you, Lisa. I don't see any further questions, but I do know we have a few more minutes if folks have any other questions. We do have another question. Gil Topete asks, can anyone clarify how assumptions were made on increased gas demand in 2030? By what percentage did the model assume increased demand from 2020 compared to 2030?
So the model actually, the synergy model doesn't calculate demand increase, but demand was an input. And so our inputs were for electric generation, they were from the production cost modeling that was presented in July. And there are slides on that in the July workshop, and they're on our website. The core, so you have 3 categories of demand. So there's core, and then there's the non-core, non-electric generation, and then there's electric generation. So again, the electric generation was a result of production cost modeling, which is a detailed future look at the electric generation that's expected in 2030. The core and non-core were based on a SoCalGas forecast. So that's how that was determined for 2030 compared to 2020.
Thank you. Jason Egan asks, do the withdrawal rates assume that all wells are available?
Yes, the withdrawal rates assume, well, that all of these storage fields are available at the inventory levels that we specified. Either, the 37%, 50%, or 70% inventory levels. They were held constant during the simulation.
And Jason now has his hand raised. Jason, you're unmuted.
Good morning. Jason Egan with SoCalGas. To follow up on that, so there was a steady withdrawal rate assumed. It didn't look more granularly at the number of wells available at each field, which would impact that withdrawal rate?
No, this did not look more granularly at the number of wells available.
I will add, though, that we did consider potential well outages in our feasibility study, which we'll be talking about a bit later today, because we do realize that there are required, CalGEM requires shut-ins twice a year, and there's also ongoing storage integrity management work that has to be done.
Thanks.
I don't see any further questions.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, we can go ahead and start our break early. So if everyone could please return at 11 o'clock and we will start promptly at 11. Thank you.
Presentation?
Yes.
All right.
Okay, I'll go ahead and kick it off. Welcome back from break, everybody. It's now 11 o'clock and we will be continuing with the agenda. This next part of the agenda is the 1 in 35 extreme peak demand with minimum local generation. This presentation and Q&A will be for 1 hour up until noon. Colette, it's all yours.
Thank you, Christina. Good morning, everyone. My name is Khaled Abdelaziz. I'm a modeling engineer with the Energy Resource Modeling in the Energy Division of the PUC. Today, I'll be talking about the second part of our reliability assessment for the Aliso Canyon Order Instituting Investigation, I-17-02-002. So as we showed in workshop 3 and first presentation today from Lisa Cosby, first part, we were assessing the 1 in 10 reliability day. Part of the framework, we also wanted to look at what is called the 1 in 35 with minimum local generation. And I'd like to first hint that this is not exactly a 1 in 35, because if you look in the reliability standards for 1 in 35 or in the California gas report, for the 1 in 35, the pipeline operator or SoCalGas, they are allowed to curtail all the non-core customers. But we thought this is really an extreme situation, and we're looking to look at a situation where this condition is a bit relaxed. So instead of curtailing all the non-core customers, which include the electric generation, we will be maintaining a minimum level of EG, which is required to maintain the reliability or the local reliability in certain parts of Southern California. And that's why here, when I decided on the presentation title, I'm saying this is an extreme peak, which is the 1 in 35, with minimum local generation case. So presentation outline. First, I'm going to talk about the goals, summary of inputs and assumptions, the results, summary of findings, and then a quick 30-minute discussion. So again, here this workshop 3 presented the results of the 1 in 10 reliability assessments where no gas curtailments were allowed. The 1 in 35 reliability standard allows for the curtailment of non-core customers, and that includes the non-core industrial and commercial, the refineries, the enhanced oil recovery, as well as EG customers or electric generation However, as I mentioned earlier, this is a very extreme case, and we're looking to maintain a certain level of electric generation through natural gas. So we're trying to do that through local reliability studies, which give us what would be the minimum amount of gas required to maintain this local reliability. So now I'm on slide 4. I'm going to discuss the summary of inputs and assumptions for the 1 in 35 with minimum local generation. So here I'm showing a breakdown of the demand that would be included in the model or in the synergy model. The first thing I'm going to note here that the summer demand under a minimum local generation scenario is lower than that of the summer high demand we discussed in workshop 3. And we already showed in workshop 3 that for those summer cases, we didn't need Aliso. So we saw no reason to run the summer cases under minimum local generation scenarios. However, for the winter, we know that the simulations in the 1 in 10 fails without Aliso. Now we have a much lesser demand for 1 in 35, so we're wondering how would that affect the need for Aliso or not. So we're looking now at 3 simulations, simulation 7, 8, and 9. They're all for the winter season, and for all 3 study years we have been considered. So simulation 7, that's winter 2020. Simulation 8, that's winter 2025. Simulation 9, that's winter 2030. And the second column here on slide 5, what I term in the minimum local generation. Again, this is Energy Division's output from production cost modeling, which in itself was based on power flow studies that were provided by our authorities, namely CAISO and LADWP. So those power flow studies were served as an input in the PCM, and we only designated certain plants to be allowed to consume gas while curtailing all the other plants for one of the summer months, which I believe was September, and then one of the winter months, which was December. And the end result of this PCM simulation is what you're seeing here. We took the hourly fuel burn profiles, and we summed that use over a whole day. So we're looking to only 104 mmCFD of gas use under a minimum local generation scenario for winter 2020. We're looking to 240 for winter 2025. We're looking at 205 mmCFD for EG under a minimum local generation scenario for winter 2030. And then the other customer classes that we have to maintain supply to under a 1 in 35 scenario, that would be SoCalGas core customers, San Diego Gas and Electric core customers, and wholesale customers. And the numbers are right there in front of you. And it's noteworthy that those numbers compared to the 1 in 10 numbers are only 6% higher for those customer classes. So add the minimum local generation, add the core customers and the wholesale customers, and then you end up with the total demand that we intend to simulate in Synergy. So this is the column before last on your right. So this is the demand under a 1 in 35 reliability day plus MLG, which is my abbreviation for the minimum local generation scenario. So let's calculate from 3.6 to 3.4 BCF per day. And I've added the last column here for comparison. I'm comparing the 1 in 35 with MLG with the 1 in 10. So the 1 in 10, we're looking at 5 BCF in 2020, 4.7 in 2025, and 4.8 in 2030. And if you compare those to the scenarios we are about to look at for the 1 in 35, so the 1 in 35 comes up to be between 70 to 75% of the 1 in 10 demand. So there is a big cut in demand, that's what I'm saying. So if I move to the next slide, showing the total fuel burned, but by all plants that were allowed to run under a minimum local generation scenario. So this is a sum basically of all power plants or all units that was coming from the production cost modeling under a minimum local generation scenario. And on the x-axis, you're looking at the hour of the day, starting from hour ending 1 to hour ending 24. On the y-axis, this is the electric load, or how much gas demand we need actually, in million cubic feet per hour. And then inside the plot, you have three cases that we are looking through. We have in red, that's 2020, in green, that's 2025, and in blue, that's 2030. And I've added the numbers here on the chart. That's the total use of the whole day. 240, that's the green, 2025. 105 MMCFD, that's the blue of 2030. And 104, that's winter of 2020. So the only thing I would note here that in 2020, you see the morning peak and you see the evening peak in the electric generation or in the gas required by the electric generators. You don't see much of the curve here. If you go to 25, which is the green curve, we have slightly more gas use for the minimum local generation to maintain reliability. And we also start to see the duck curve in winter. And then you move to blue, which is the winter 2030. You have slightly less gas use to maintain local reliability, but then the duck curve becomes more and more prominent. So how does this compare to the total load? Right now, you're only looking at the load or the gas load from the electric generation. So what happens if I input that and add it to the core customers and the whole customers and the wholesale customers? So if you do that in synergy, this is what you end up seeing. And we have seen a lot of those load curves by now, but I'm going to try to explain it. So on the x-axis, again, you're looking at the time of day, so 6 a.m. until 6 a.m. the next morning. On the y-axis, this is the load. And Synergy likes to plot the load in negative because it's a demand. But you can see I start with a load of minus 4.6, and then it peaks at 7, and then it starts to drop again, and then it peaks again at hour 20, that's 8 p.m., and then it starts to drop again until midnight. So what I would note here is that although we see those duck curves for the minimum local generation, and we were afraid that those ramps are too much to be handled by the gas system, but once you lump them or superimpose them to the core customers, you end up with this plot here. So you don't see much of the ramps of the EG, but the profile is heavily governed by the core customers' profiles, which is very, very similar to the 1 in 10 and the 1 in 10 cases that we have shown this morning and in the last workshop. So I'm using the same color codes here. So in red, that's winter 2020. In green, that's winter 2025. And in blue, that's winter 2030. And again, this is showing the loads after we load everything inside Synergy. And this is how the loads look like. So now that I've covered the loads, I'm going to start looking at the rest of the assumptions using the model. So I'm now on slide 8. That's the summary of inputs and assumptions for the supplies, storage fields, and the outages. And we're basically using the same set of assumptions that used in the 1 in 10 in workshop 3 or in the base case in this morning's workshop. So we're assuming that the non-Aliso fields are maintained at 90% levels inventory. We are using the maximum withdrawal curves. We are still using reduced pressures on line 3000, line 4000, and line 235-2, which are on the northern system. I've listed the supplies here, the southern zone, the northern zone, the Wheeler Ridge. The second column, we have the nominal capacity. We previously said that we're going to use receipt point utilization of 85% for the north and the south and 100% for Wheeler. So the column before last has the supplies without the outages. And then due to the outages I'm showing on here, which are the reduced pressure on the line 3000, line 4000, line 235-2, and adding a California production of 70, I end up with supplies of about 3.1 BCF. So these are basically the same supplies we've used in the 1 in 10 simulation. We are also using 90% inventory levels in the non-Aliso fields. So we have the same withdrawal rates that we have seen before, which is 800 for Honor Rancho. I believe it's 299 for PDR and 230 for La Grille. So I'm not going to go much into the details. I'm going to start showing the results now. So slide 9, that's the section break. Slide 10, I'm showing the results of those 3 simulations. And all simulations were successful without the use of Aliso. And by successful, I mean those 4 bullets I'm showing there. Pressures were held above the mean operating pressures. Pressures were maintained below MOPs. Line pack was recovered, and facilities were operating within their capacity, such as the regulators and the compressors. And I'm hinting here towards the question that we had in the previous presentation with the star here and the footnote. Pressure in the San Joaquin Valley dropped below min up due to dry conditions. And this is something we've been seeing in most of, if not all, the simulations that was provided by SoCal. And these min-ops are not due to limitations on the withdrawals from Aliso field. If I try to summarize that, basically there is a regulator there, and in all of the simulations, the modelers are able to maintain the MOP above the regulator. But downstream of the regulator, a few miles later, still the pressure below MOP. So the reason we're seeing that is would require possibly some upgrades on San Joaquin, but it's not due to limitations on the supplies, whether it's from the receipt points or from the storage fields. So all simulations are successful without the use of Aliso. So again, I'm not going to show a lot of the results. I'm showing simulations. Hopefully we're used to it by now. On the x-axis, we start at hour 6 in the morning, and then we end at hour 6 the day after. On the y-axis, we have the line pack in million cubic feet. And we can see for all simulations, the line pack was maintained. And if you actually look at the line pack, it follows the load. So you see the load starts to peak by 7, and that causes a drop in the line pack. Though the line pack is lagging by almost 3 hours. So the minimum line pack you see is at hour 10, but this was at hour 7. So this lag between the line pack and the load is primarily due to the physics of the natural gas. And it mainly correlates with the load. Load go up, you see the line pack goes down. The load goes down, you see the line pack goes back up. And that's why you see the second dip in the line pack between hour 20 and 23. And this is actually due to the peak, the evening peak at hour 20. And then in the end of the simulation, by hour 30, which is 6 the next day, line pack was maintained, and we returned to the same values that we started with. So this is basically showing one of the criteria.
Khaled, are you talking? I'm not hearing anything.
Hi, testing. Hello, testing.
I hear
Hello.
you, Christina, but I'm not hearing Khaled.
Okay. Khaled, if you can hear us, we cannot hear you.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, my phone got disconnected. I had to hang up and call back. So start video. Let's start sharing again. All right. So as I was trying to mention, all the simulations were successful, line pack was restored, all 4 criteria were maintained. So here is the summary of findings. The daily demand on the 135 extreme peak day with a minimum local generation is about 70 to 75% of the daily demand on a 1 in 10 peak day. The 135 extreme peak with MLG, or minimum local generation, simulations for winter 2020, 25, and 2030 were successful without the use of Aliso Canyon UGS. It follows also that the 135 extreme peak with all non-core curtailment simulations will also be successful without the use of Aliso. And sensitivity on the inventory level of non-Aliso field could be performed if needed. And that's all I have for the 135. And now I think we can take questions.
Thank you. We just have one clarifying question from Norman Peterson, who asks if the min local gen figures came from the joint agencies, specifically the CPUC, CEC, LADWP, and CAISO. If not, what was the source?
Yes, the power flow studies were supplied by LADWP and CAISO. We took those as an input for our own production cost modeling and in SERV-M, and then the result of that was the fuel burn profiles for different units. And from them, we were able to generate the hourly profiles for the gas use and the total demand that I'm showing here.
To clarify, it's LADWP and CAISO, but not the joint agencies, because the joint agencies would include the California Energy Commission.
Thank you. Our next question is from Marcel Hawicker. Question is, how did non-core curtailments compare to historical curtailments? And what was the amount of non-core gas that was curtailed?
I honestly don't have any idea about the magnitude of the curtailments historically. Maybe the gas policy and reliability team has any input. So just for comparison, the EG generation for the 1 in 10 is almost a BCF. What we model in the 1 in 10 for EG is around 1 BCF in the winter. So here you're actually looking at 10%, you're looking at 25% and 20% compared to the 1 in 10 simulation that we showed this morning.
Thank you. Our next question is from Jason Hector, who asks, can you explain what the 1 in 35 and 1 in 10 mean?
So if we want to look at the very
Khaled, we're having trouble hearing you.
Okay, how about now?
Much better.
Okay, so in a very simple case, I would say the 1 in 10, you're looking at 10 years and picking the coldest year of those 10 years. But from a statistical point of view, you actually don't look at 10 years. You may be looking at 20 and then picking the highest 2, or you're looking at 30 and then picking the highest 3. Same for the 1 in 35, you could be looking at 100 years, and then 1 in 35, which is almost 3 in 100. So you're looking at the 3 coldest years in 100, or 1 cold year in 35. Does that answer your question?
Here, Jason responded and said, so that is a way to be conservative.
Yes, you're designing for a bad case, not the worst case, because the worst case would be then a 1 in 10 or a 1 in 200. So these are reliability standards that were mandated by the Commission, I believe more than 10 years ago, that pipeline operators, whether it's PG&E or SoCal, they have to maintain this level of reliability on a 1 in 10. So on a 1 in 10, you're not allowed to curtail any customers. on 1 in 35, the operator is allowed to curtail the non-core customers. And that's why we see the lesser demand on 1 in 35.
Thank you. Our next question is from Marcel Howiger, who asks, what was actually curtailed in the modeling compared to modeling demand? Was it all of non-core demand?
So the non-core, non-EG are all curtailed, as I'm showing in this table. So non-core, non-EG, they're all curtailed. These are refineries, non-core commercial industrial. The only customers that remain online are core in SoCal, core in SDG&E, and wholesale customer, plus a few EG units that are causing this demand here on column 3 on slide 5.
Thank you. Next up is a question from Norman Peterson, who asks, what were the conditions assumed for min local gen? For example, an N1 contingency?
Donald, would you like to take that question?
Yes, the min local gen constraint, meaning the electric generation, was the product of a power flow study. And so it's the N-1 contingency that identifies the minimum local generation needed. This was talked about at the July 28th workshop, and so more information is available in those slides. Thank you.
Thank you, and I don't see any further questions.
Let's give it about 1 more minute and see if any other questions show up, and then we can start an early lunch break.
Jason Hector is asking if the report will be made available. A summary report.
Yes, we're already working on the 1 in 10 report, and we're going to add the 1 in 35 to it.
And just to add to that, it will be a formal report, and parties will be able to comment on it.
So we have another question from Catherine Elder, who asks, did slide 5 curtail wholesale, or did we serve wholesale?
No, wholesale are served. It's shown on slide 5, the customers that are served. Slide 5, we're serving SoCal core, SDG&E core, wholesale. I believe there are 4 customers for wholesale other than SDG&E. And then you have the minimum local generation on the 3rd column.
Thank you. The next question is from Gil Topete, who asks, if the takeaway is that Aliso Canyon withdrawals will be needed under these scenarios, was anyone tasked with offering their thoughts on what alternative generation or demand reductions might be necessary? And he clarifies, would be necessary to avoid Aliso Canyon withdrawals.
Hi, this is Jean. I can talk about that. As you may be aware, the governor asked us to hire a consultant to look into what changes to the system would be required to eliminate Aliso Canyon. We have hired that consultant, and they are currently working on looking into what could be done to what changes to the system, both gas, electric, infrastructure, rules, et cetera, would be required to be able to eliminate Aliso entirely, and how much it would cost. So actually, if I could I should mention one more thing. The first workshop for phase 3 will be in November. I believe it's November 17th. So we definitely invite everyone to participate in that as well.
Mr. Topete asked a follow-up questions. Any ETA on when the consultant will be sharing any status?
At the workshop in November, they will be giving updates.
Just to add to that, we will be announcing a November 17th workshop. This will be the first workshop in phase 3 of this Aliso Canyon proceeding. So if you are on the service list, you will be getting the information for that workshop shortly.
Thank you. We have another question from Jason Egan, who asks, to make sure I'm tracking, you used 1250 mmCFD of receipt capacity on the northern system, which is 100% of the current receipt capacity there. Is that correct?
Let me bring up the slide, Christina. So the supplies with the outages are the 1250. So these are under certain reduction of pressures on line 4000, line 235, and line 3000.
And just a reminder that this is for the year 2030, not for the current year.
Jason's follow-up question is, and for all of these scenarios, we are assuming all non-core customers are curtailed except minimum generation.
Yes.
Jason asked another follow-up. In our last workshop, MinGen showed pretty significant increased costs and unserved load. Was that a consideration here?
I'm showing the results for the hydraulic modeling only. So we're trying to know the effect of the only maintaining minimum local generation on the storage fields, on the gas system. I believe Donald and Munir addressed the reliability issues back in workshop 3. Donald, do you want to add anything?
No, you said it right. We addressed the electric reliability effects before. It's this hydraulic modeling reliability effects that we're talking about now.
Thank you, and I don't see any further questions so far.
Okay, let's give it one more minute. It doesn't seem like we have any more questions, so we can go ahead and start our lunch break early. Lunch was scheduled from noon until 1. And since we've already shared the agenda, in the event someone is joining exactly at 1 for the next part of the agenda, we'll go ahead and make this lunch break go from now until 1 o'clock. So please return in about 1.5 hours. Thank you, everyone. Hello, welcome back. It is now 1 o'clock and we will resume today's workshop. Next on the agenda is Khaled presenting our last presentation of the day. It will be the feasibility assessment On the agenda, it states that this time is going from 1 to 2, but it will actually go from 1 to 2:30 to allow time for questions. So with that, Khaled, you can go ahead and get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. My second presentation for the day. I'm Khaled Abdelaziz. I'm with the natural gas modeling lead with the energy resource modeling team in the energy division of the PUC. The second presentation, I would like to present how we did the feasibility assessment for Aliso Canyon OII 17-02-002. The very early stages of this investigation, when we were working on our scenarios framework, we thought the feasibility assessment might be an optional assessment to do. And LANL, or Los Alamos National Laboratory, actually presented this to us as an optional. But throughout the process and based on the stakeholders' input, we realized that it's actually important, very important to do the feasibility assessment for the reasons we're about to present here and the goals for the feasibility assessment. So I'm moving to the first slide, slide 2, presentation outline. Again, we're going to start with the goals and introduction. The methodology we used for the feasibility assessment. I'm going to present some analysis of the historical standout results, area of findings, and then the Aliso Canyon inventory recommendation. And finally, we'll open up for questions. We actually have 2 breaks for questions, one right after the methodology and one in the middle of the results, in case someone has questions to catch up on the presentation. So slide 3, goals and introduction. So what is the goal of the feasibility assessment? Number 1, determine if the minimum inventory levels of all storage fields that were assumed in the reliability assessments are achievable throughout the winter and the summer seasons. And I'm here reminding everyone who's watching, for the reliability assessment, the base cases assumed 90% inventory levels in the non-Aliso underground storage fields for the winter season. And for the summer season, we tried to stress the system a bit, so we took the inventory levels of the non-Aliso fields down to 70% of some of the cases. Second, the goal for the feasibility assessment is to provide more insight to the minimum required inventory level at Aliso Canyon itself. And that's because the reliability assessment provided only a withdrawal capacity required for Aliso Canyon on a 1 in 10 reliability day. So due to the limitations on Synergy and how computationally expensive it is, we can only model 1 day inside Synergy. But we have no idea if we have a cold streak or a cold winter, what's going to happen to the inventory levels. So, however, the reliability assessment did not address or analyze multiple cold days or a cold year. So a quick review of the scenarios framework. When we wrote it probably a year and a half ago, almost 2 years, we had discussed 3 possible approaches to conduct the feasibility assessment. The first 2 were aiming to use Synergy for both steady and transient analyses. But after staff spent time on Synergy, we probably spent collectively, I guess, more than 200 hours on Synergy just to review the Synergy results from the reliability assessment and produce our sensitivity cases. We realized it's going to be very prohibitive to perform the feasibility assessment within Synergy. And that's primarily because the operational actions are very hard to automate. So we've seen throughout the simulations, the reliability assessment, we have to open regulators, close regulators, switch the discharge pressure on the compressors, sometimes put a compressor on bypass. And it's very hard to automate those things within Synergy, primarily because of the varying demand and the varying configurations on the receive points. So therefore, we decided to use the third approach. So we're simply doing a mass balance on every day of the year to figure out the inventory levels at the storage fields. And we're going to see later how I introduce some stochasticity or some randomness to the model, give us better understanding of the gas system throughout the whole year. So I'm moving to the next slide, slide 5. And I'm finding 2 ways to present the methodology. So on this slide, I'm just presenting the summary, how I executed the feasibility assessment. In 4 or 5 slides after that, I'm presenting it in depth. So you might not be interested in the exact parts, but I'm hoping that this summary here would provide outlines or the main steps to perform the study that we used. So the summary on slide 5, the first bullet, the methodology attempts a mass balance on each day of the study year. The methodology inputs are the forecasted daily demand using a random draws from a known distribution, an assumed pipeline capacity, and for that I'm going to assume that the customers are scheduling this full capacity every day. Also, one very important input to the methodology is the maximum withdrawal injection curves that are obtained from SoCal and are primarily experimental results from their fields. Another input is the working gas capacity of all 4 storage fields. So using those inputs, I do a simulation for a whole year, and for each day I determine whether there is an excess or deficit in the gas supply. And based on that, I either inject or withdraw from the storage fields, and I do that while respecting the injection and the withdrawal limits of each of the 4 fields. And if there isn't sufficient supply to meet the demand, that means I have a mass imbalance. That means what's coming in plus what I can withdraw from the field not sufficient to meet the demand. I model that, I flag that day as an imbalance day. And that's an EFO. I'm calling that imbalance, for an EFO. And we're going to see hopefully more in the presentation that if I trigger an EFO, it's primarily, it signals also that I wasn't able to maintain the minimum levels in the storage fields. So this is the summary of what is in depth for the methodology. So the following steps, step 1, I started looking at the historical data for the send-out. So we already had a data request from SoCal, I believe it was data request 6, and we have historical send-out data between 2010 and 2017. And I tried to analyze the distribution for this send-out. And using this distribution, I can come up with a standard deviation for each calendar month. And then knowing the standard deviation from step 1 and the mean daily use for a study year, if only a gas report, I try to hear the X bar. Use those 2 information to come up of the total gas demand on each day for each calendar month. So now I'm moving to slide 7. Step 3, for each calendar month, randomly select a number of daily demand values from the assumed distribution. And here, ideally from a statistical point of view, I need to make many draws, but since I want to integrate or track the inventory levels, I have to make a number of draws that is equal to the number of days in that calendar month, be it 30 days, 31 days, or 29 days. And once I do this draw, or I select a number, now I have what I term the forecast daily demand on that day. Step 4, I have to make further assumptions on the remaining inputs. So I assume the receipt capacity in California production. And I make a certification here that I'm going to schedule full capacity every day. Step 5 is daily excess or deficit in the natural gas from the supply. And if there's an excess, I start in the storage field without injecting, without exceeding the injection. Slide 8 is the deficit that I have to withdraw from the storage field. And then in step 5, I'm trying to withdraw, and there isn't sufficient capacity to meet the demand. I flag the day as an EFO. And I save for this day for further analysis. And again, triggering an EFO here on imbalance signals that I wasn't able to maintain the low inventory levels. The inventory level. Inventory levels over a whole calendar year using known maximum withdrawal injection curves. Step 6, I introduce some enhancement to the model, utilization factors on the storage fields to account for the well availability. I'm starting to put minimums so I can vary those on the inventory levels, the initial volume in the storage field, and which months should I start the division or the tracking from. All right, so again, summary of the methodology. So calculate the standard deviation from historical data and obtain the daily mean from CGR. Use those two parameters to come up with the distribution for each calendar month. Determine the gas supply assumptions. Calculate whether I have excess or deficit in the gas, and then start withdrawing or injection, and finally track the inventory levels over the whole year. And once I started coding those or to operationalize how would I do that, I realized I have to make an assumptions on the injection order in the storage field. So I looked into how long it will take to fill each of the 4 fields we have in hand. And based on the maximum injection curves that we have, I did some integration on the 4 fields. So I figured out that Lagolita would need 176 days to fill from 0 to max. Aliso Canyon would require 126 days to fill from 0 to 68.6 BCF. Honor Rancho would need about 107 days, and Playa del Rey would need only 26 days. But of course, the reason PDR needs only 26 days because it's very small capacity of 1.9 BCF compared to the rest of the fields. For a very idealized scenario, I decided to inject the slowest field first. And by slowest, I mean the field that takes longest to be filled. And if you look at the order on top, it's Lagolita, followed by Aliso Canyon, then Honor Rancho, and then Playa del Rey. But since one of the goals of this investigation was to minimize the use of Aliso, I pushed Aliso all the way to the end. So the order is what is shown here: LG for Lagolita, HR for Honor Rancho, followed by PDR, Playa del Rey, and then followed by Aliso Canyon. Of course, this is an idealization, and there could be different scenarios in real life. All right, same goes for slide 11. I have to decide on the withdrawal order of the storage fields. So I'm looking at the withdrawal capacity of the different 4 fields. And I'm realizing what you're seeing here. The withdrawal capacity of Lagolita decreases relatively slowly, while the withdrawal capacity of PDR decreases fast, about 20 times as fast as LG. Honor Rancho and Aliso Canyon withdrawal capacity decreases 3 times as fast as Lagolita. And again, since minimizing the use of Aliso Canyon is the goal, I decide on the following withdrawal order, which is the same as the injection order actually. So Lagolita, Honor Rancho, PDR, and then Aliso Canyon. Next, so this is the methodology. And like I said, for the historical data, I would like to be able to know what is the statistical distribution, how does it look like, so I can figure out or forecast the gas demand for an entire year, be it 2020 or something in the future. So in the next few slides, I'm showing how I did the analysis and what are the findings when I do the analysis on the historical standout, and trying to figure out how the distribution looks like when in the standard deviation. So I'm moving to slide 13. We're looking at data request number 6. And you're looking only at the historical standouts by year between 2010 and 2017. We actually had some data for 2018, but it wasn't the full year, so I discarded 2018, especially it's after the leak. So we're looking at histograms for each calendar year. So one histogram for 2010, one for 2012, and so on until 2017. And then each histogram shows you the number of days for a given demand. So on the x-axis, you have the sendout in million cubic feet per day. And then on the y-axis, you have the number of days that you had this range of sendout. So for example, if you haven't seen a histogram before, let's look at, for example, year 2013. And I'm seeing we had 60 days. That's the highest count of days on 2013. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor here. So this corresponds to a demand of about, I would say, 2.4 BCFD. So that tells me in 2013, I had 60 days in that range and so on. I'm highlighting here in blue circles that this data is heavily skewed, means we have an asymmetrical distribution, doesn't look like a bell-shaped or symmetrical. There's a heavy skewness to the right. I'm also highlighting in red the days where we are most afraid of or concerned about. These are the high demand days. So you see in 2013, we had more than 10 days where the demand was more than 4 BCF per day. I also look at the monthly distribution for the historical data from 2010 to 2017, because I wasn't sure the data is actually asymmetric. But again, looking at the monthly distribution, I realized the data is heavily skewed, means it's asymmetric, and I have lots of readings on the right as opposed to the left. So as much as I wanted to use a Gaussian distribution or a bell-shaped distribution, that was not possible, and I opted for what is called the gamma distribution. And gamma distribution is widely used in engineering to provide to model continuous variables that are always positive. We have the gas demand is always positive, and it has a skewed distribution like I showed. Everything is skewed to the right. And gamma distribution also represents an accumulation of events, and in which case these are customers actually burning that gas. So without getting into more details, the thing about the gamma distribution, it's a 2-parameter distribution. So if you look at the very bottom here on slide 15, if I know the standard deviation and the mean, I can come up with a statistical distribution. So that's going to be my goal, to come up with the forecast for a whole year for gas demand. If I know the mean from the California gas report, and if I can somehow figure out the standard deviation for that calendar month, I can have a distribution. So next slide, slide 16. This is me trying to actually fit the historical data into a gamma distribution. So I think what you need to know here is that the blue curve tracks, on most of the times tracks the red curve exceptionally well. So blue curve, this is the gamma distribution. Red curve, this is the historical data. And the red curve actually is an approximation of the histogram you see on the back. So at this point, I was satisfied with the gamma distribution. I went ahead and I decided to use it for the rest of the analysis. But I still need to know the standard deviation. So I can get the mean from the California gas report. So if you look at the California gas report for whether it's a recorded year or a forecast year, the pipeline operator tends to show the mean daily demand for each calendar month. So one number for January, one number for February, and so on, whether it's for a cold year or an average year. But I still would like to know the standard deviation. So again, I use the historical data I have and try to find the correlation between the mean daily volume, which is here shown on the x-axis, and the standard deviation, which is shown on the y-axis. And for each month of the year between 2010 and 2017, each of those months I compute the mean daily volume and I compute the standard deviation, and you see it on the plot here colored by the month. So you're actually looking at how many points? You're looking at 12 months times 8 years. That's about 96 points. And this gives me an idea of how the standard deviation correlates with the daily volume. And if I try to fit a line to that, it's a pretty weak correlation, but this is the best I can do at this point. Correlation of that line in the middle is 0.7. And if I try to get the confidence intervals, it's those other two lines you see, the upper 95 confidence and the lower 95% confidence. And the way I'm going to use the graph is the following. If I know the mean daily volume, which is found in the California gas report, I can go into that graph and figure out a value for the standard deviation. And I decided to go with either the mean or the upper or the lower. So the example I'm showing here, I have a demand of almost, say, 2,400. I can go inside this curve and pick 3 values for the standard deviation. One is the mean, one is the upper, and one is the lower. And now if I have the mean daily volume and I have the standard deviation, I can actually obtain a distribution for any month. So here I'm grabbing this data from the California gas report, and we know the feasibility assessment. We'd like to do it for year 2020. So the table on the right, I actually grabbed this data from California gas report 2018. You can see the average daily demand for an average year, and then for a cold year for all 12 calendar months. So I can tell here if I average all 12 months, I can tell the mean for the average year is 2.5 BCF. For a cold year, it's 2.7 BCF. If I add the total gas use, which would be the average use times the number of days, Then I come up here with this number for a whole year. If it's an average year, I would need about 939 BCF of gas. If the year is cold, then I need 1,004 BCF. So on slide 18 here on the left, I'm saying that for an average year, we need 939 BCF. For a cold year, we need 1,004 BCF, which is about 7% higher than that of an average year. So I'm not going to show any more histograms. I'm hoping this slide before we stop for questions is going to summarize what I tried to do. So I'm going to move to slide 19. And I'm just trying to give the audience a sense of how my selection of the mean daily use by calendar month and the standard deviation would affect the number of cold years in a given permutation. So if you look at this table on the bottom, I have a demand range. I clustered it into bins. So on the first column, this is demand more than 4.5. The second row, this is a demand between 4.5 and 4. The third row between 4 and 3.5. And then the last row, that's demand less than 3.5 BCFD. And then as I showed in the previous slide, I have two variations of a year. It could be an average year and or a cold year. And from the slide before, if I know the mean daily volume, I can come up with a standard deviation. So it turns out for each year, I can have three variations. One if I pick the average standard deviation, one if I pick the lower standard deviation, and one if I pick the upper standard deviation. For a cold year, I can have three variations, and then for an average year, I can have also three variations. And I do this what I call a dry run. I'm not actually running the model, just trying to see how many number of days are going to fall within a specific range of demand. So the numbers, the rest of the numbers you're seeing, this is how many days I'm expecting within a certain bin. It's a histogram, but it's shown in a tabular format, so we can get a sense of the numbers. So for example, let's look at a cold year, and when I pick an average standard deviation, I end up with 1.67 days where the demand is higher than 4.5 BCF. And then I end up with 7.5 days where the demand is between 4.5 and 4. And then almost 25 days where the demand is between 3.5 and 4. And then the rest of the year, which is 360 minus these three rows here, that's a demand less than 3.5, which is around 330. Again, if I look at a very mild situation, if I look at an average year with a lower standard deviation, I actually get a very negligible number of days where the demand is above 4.5. I get 0.1 day where the demand is between 4 and 4.5. Get 6.33 days where the demand is between 3.5 and 4, and then the remaining of the year is less than 3.5. So I'm looking at these numbers and wondering which ones I should choose for the analysis. I ended up showing what I'm encircling here in green, a cold year with an upper standard deviation. I'm going to show some results for an average year, but the main reason I picked the cold year, it's very close to what we have seen in 2013. In fact, in 2013, we have 12 days where the demand is above 4. And 2013 wasn't even the coldest year. I believe it had like 1,200 HDDs. A cold year would have around almost 1,600 HDDs. So I'm looking at those numbers. I'm guessing this is what I need to design or to perform the feasibility study upon. So 4.6 days where the demand is above 4.5, 11 days between 4 and 4.5, 30 days between 3.5 and 4, and 320 between less than 3.5 or between 0 and 3.5. I haven't run the model yet at this point. I'm just trying to show you what does a cold year actually mean within that context of random draws from a distribution. And at this point, I'm going to stop to take questions. I would like to have questions only regarding the previous slides because I haven't shown the rest of the model yet. So if there is a specific slide that you want me to repeat or something is not clear, I'll be happy to answer or repeat the slide.
There's a question from Dave BC who asked, if the feasibility assessment assumed full pipeline receipts, How will an EFO improve a situation of not enough gas supply to meet demand?
So this is still going to come ahead. An EFO is just a metric for me to decide how well the values that I changed are, how well the values I changed. So let's say I run a 3 BCF situation at 2.7 BCF, and I will see that in the 2.3 BCF, I have more imbalances than the 3 BCF. There will be more to come on that, but this is a very idealization of the actuals operations. But the number of EFOs is what I'm using to decide whether I can meet the minimum inventory levels or not, or maintain them throughout the winter.
Thank you. And Edward Bedners has raised his hand. You are unmuted.
Hi, Colin. Listen, this is a very dense material. Fortunately, I had a chance to read some of it yesterday. And coming on down, so I just want to make sure of a few things that I've got. So I gather that you're running a full year without going through simulation, and you're working a mass balance. If we go to slide 11, where we're looking at your withdrawal sequence.
Mm-hmm.
One of the concerns being is that typically from what I gather, all or most of the storage fields are withdrawn and there's a decision by the operator and or a choice. Mm-hmm. A concern here is, given the different locations, just using a mass balance, do you have a feel for whether or not the pressures would be supplied by any of these four at any given point in time as necessary?
Well, like I said, this is an idealization. Uh-huh.
Oh, sure.
Do you have more questions?
I understand. No, I'm sorry, just wanted to clarify. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's an idealization. We ideally we want to run this in synergy for the full year, but like I said, this is computationally prohibitive. So this is an assumption in the models, and if you guys wait for the results, you're going to see it's, on some occasions I'm changing this sequence, and I'm not seeing a lot of changes in how the inventory is being pulled. Yeah.
You did run.
I tried a few permutations, but I don't want to go into detail. But I tried, for example, on this slide specifically, I tried to bring PDR after Aliso Canyon, because you're gonna see in the results later that PDR gets depleted really, really quickly because of that order.
I did see that. I'm just curious, did you grab any of these snapshots to confirm that on any given moment, the storage that you've chosen is going to be able to make the necessary minimum pressures?
No, we're not running synergy for the feasibility study.
Okay, you didn't want to cross-check against synergy as far as the practicality?
Well, there is 100 possible permutations, right?
I was talking about just a random selection of a few just to make sure, particularly for some of the ones that are in different locations. No.
Mm-hmm. No, we didn't.
I understand the practicality issues. I was just trying to see if there's any way to try to cross-check against some of the constraints and use of the storage. Moving on down to the standardizations that you've got. So you're doing a grab on this, going to 19, slide 19. So that looks like your upper standard deviation has two things going for it. One, it's a conservative number from what I can tell as far as evaluating the need for storage. So that's good to see. Also, I'm glad to hear you matched it against something historical. It gives a very much higher degree of confidence on it. Now, is this the one, the two cases that follow this, I guess I don't want to get too far ahead. So if you could just clarify how you use these in the cases that are to follow, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, on each slide, you're going to see my assumption on the left, whether I use the cold year, an upper standard deviation, or lower, or an average year.
Okay, that's what I needed. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question. Yes, we have another question from Gil Topate. Slides 10 and 11 complement each other, but did your analysis look at scenarios on the number of days and withdrawal amounts it would take before accessing Aliso Canyon would be required? In other words, if Aliso Canyon is last for withdrawals, is getting to these withdrawals dependent on conditions of a single cold day or multiple days?
Well, as I'm showing the sequence here, I start to withdraw from LG, then HR, then PDR. If there isn't enough withdrawal capacities from all those three combined, then I have to go into Aliso and withdraw from it. However, I'm adding also another if condition. If I don't want those fields to drop below 90%, I check if those fields reach the 90% or not. If they reach the 90%, then I go withdraw from Aliso again. I hope this is going to become clear the more I progress in the presentation, but you're going to see withdrawals on many days. Yes, I'm depleting the fields as long as I have the withdrawal capacity from all three. If I don't have the withdrawal capacity from all three, I have to go into Aliso. So on a given day, I have to meet the demand, even if I have to use Aliso. Does that answer your question?
Yes, he says thank you, and I don't see any further questions.
All right, let's move on. All right, so I'm going to present a sample of the results first. I just wanted to make sure how the model is working. So I'm going to show you two very extreme cases, one I call the ideal case and one is the unfavorable case, just to give you a sense of what plots I was looking at and how am I judging one case from the other. So I'm going to start with a very nice case here. This is what you're looking at. Forget about the graph on the right for now. Just look at the assumptions on the left. So this is a scenario where I'm assuming an average year. I'm assuming a daily capacity of around 3 BCF. And this capacity is only 100 less than what we assumed in the reliability assessment. I'm working on the less conservative case. That's a lower standard deviation. So it's nice and there's not a lot of variations throughout the year, throughout the month for a given demand. I'm also assuming all wells are available, which is actually impractical. I'm using assumptions here. What I started with is I'm not allowing the non-Aliso fields to drop to below 90%. So the fifth bullet on the left, I'm allowing the fields, the non-Aliso fields only to drop to 90%. And the last one, I'm allowing all the fields to be filled up to 100%. And then let's go over the plot on the right. You're going to see at least, I'm counting 11 cases. I'm showing this plot. So I'm going to try to explain this plot. On the lower x-axis, you're looking actually, these are daily data, but I selected to show only the month name on the axis. And every grid line represents 3 months, I believe. Yeah, 3 months. So from March to June, and then from June to September, and then September to December, and then December to March. And I don't want anyone to look at this graph and think I'm forecasting the gas for 5 years ahead. I'm actually running 2020 5 times. That's why you see this note here. This plot is not for 5 future years. This plot is 5 repetition of study year 2020. And the reason there is a variation from year to year is because those random draws that I keep doing from one year to the next, which might affect how many cold days I'm actually in that year. So the x-axis is time, but it's only 1 year, and then it's repeating itself 5 times. The y-axis, I'm showing the inventory fraction. So on the left, see I'm starting from minus 0.1 all the way to 1.1. So you can see in this simulation, I'm starting at month March, and I'm starting with the 10% or a fraction of 0.1 for all fields. And then I do this inventory tracking. I inject or withdraw. It's obvious that from March all the way to September, I'm injecting, at which points I'm filling all the fields. And then I reach December. Automatically, the model starts to withdraw because I have demand higher than the daily capacity. And then you can see this repeating itself over 2020 over and over. So this is how the plot works. I've looked at many of those plots before trying to decide on the next step. But again, this is not 5 years. This is year 2020 repeated only 5 times. And further ahead in the study, I'm actually repeating it 50 times to get a more statistically dependable or statistically convergent or meaningful result. So again, this is a very ideal scenario. You see, we filled all the fields, nice. From March till before September, you have all the 3 fields filled, whether it's Aliso or non-Aliso. You're going down from 100% to 90%, and everything looks nice. Of course, if I look at historical data, this is not what we're seeing at all. All right, so I hope this graph makes sense now. I'm going to move to a second case, which is what I call an unfavorable scenario. I just wanted to show how bad it's going to be if I change the assumption. So now we're looking at this. This is one of many bad case scenarios or unfavorable scenarios. So this time, instead of having an average year, you're looking into a cold year. I brought down the capacity to 2.6 BCF. I'm using the more conservative standard deviation, which is the upper. Wells availability are down to 75%, which we can see happening depending on well work and outages. I'm allowing the non-Aliso fields only to drop to 90, and I'm allowing 100% for all levels. So the axes are the same, except now you're starting to see those red dots, and each red dot represents a day where I wasn't able to meet the demand. I'm showing only the low EFOs, so these are days when I wasn't able to meet the demand. And I actually combined in the same axes on the left. So if you look on the left, this is the amount of imbalance that was present on that day. So if you look at the very high end of the chart, I had imbalances of almost a BCF, and you have it all over the way. And the reason I'm saying this is a very bad case scenario, even though I allowed Aliso to be filled to 100%, at this very low capacity, which is lower than the average daily mean that you need for a cold year, I wasn't able to fill Aliso all the way. So you can see even in any of those iterations for year 2020, the maximum I can reach is about 35% in the second iteration. You can see also that going into the first year, I wasn't able to fill the fields. So you can see the first iteration before heading into the winter. Lagolita and Honor Rancho, which are the blue and the green, I wasn't able to fill those. And I actually went into the second summer before getting them to full. So a few notes here. Like one of the stakeholders, I believe David asked, how's that going to count towards the analysis? You can see that most of the EFOs were triggered. If you try to analyze this graph, you see that the EFOs were triggered primarily when Aliso was depleted. So you can see Aliso at 0, and you have a lot of EFOs or imbalanced days. You can see also because I restricted the non-Aliso fields to 90%, so I'm not allowing them to drop below 90% during the winter. You can see also that during this period, I'm getting a lot of EFOs. So like I said, this is a very unfavorable scenario. We're decapping basically the pipeline. So starting to use some reasonable numbers, more reasonable numbers. So I'm going to show a few more results. So on slide 24, I'm summarizing what I have shown and what I'm about to show. So previous slides, I showed case 1 and 2. Case 1 was the ideal case, no EFOs, everything is nice and warm. Case 2 is a cold year with a very bad shape on the pipeline. So I did many iterations. I'm only showing what can deliver the message here. So for the next slides, for case 21 to 24, I'm doing a sensitivity on the Aliso maximum allowed inventory level for a cold year. So I'm keeping the non-Aliso minimum allowed to a constant and then playing around with the maximum allowed non-Aliso. In cases 9 to 13, I'm switching the things around. I'm doing a sensitivity on the non-Aliso minimum inventory, and I'm keeping Aliso constant. I think I'm going to make a stop after case 9 to 13 before going into the Hadley case, the parametric study. All right, so case 21 to 24. I'm now on slide 25. So I'm using a cold year. I'm using a daily capacity, something more reasonable. It's not a 2.6 and it's not a 3, it's a 2.8. An upper monthly standard deviation, so the more conservative, 85% of the wells available. I'm still trying to maintain a 90% minimum level for non-Aliso and 100% maximum level for all for non-Aliso fields. So we're going to look at 4 cases, case 21 to 24. Case 21, I'm allowing Aliso to be filled to 100%, which is the 68.6 DCF allowed by CalGEM. Then I'm doing an 80%, then a 60%, and then a 40%. And I try to place those graphs right on the same place so we can see what's happening here. So the first case, I'm looking at what happens if I allow Aliso only to 40%. So I'm going to let you watch this graph for a minute, maybe less than a minute. So again, this is not in the future, this is 5 editions of 2020. And I can see that I'm able to fill these. And I can see I'm still doing EFOs, especially when Aliso starts to deplete between December and March, and maybe all the way to April too. And I can see that those EFOs are clustered when I try to maintain 90% on the other 3 fields. So if you look at the other 3 colors, light blue or cyan, that's Lagolita, green, that's Onorancho, and purple, that's PDR, applied array. So I'm able to almost fill those all the way to the September, but you can see that right after December here, I already reached the minimum I would like to keep, the 90%, and that's why I start to withdraw from Aliso. Or maybe I've withdrawn before that if I didn't have enough withdrawal capacity. So the next 3 slides, I'm trying to increase the allowable inventory in Aliso. So this is 40%, this is 60, 80, and 100. So I try to scroll those many times to see what's happening. So I can see that the more I fill Aliso, maybe I'm getting less EFOs, but I'm nowhere close to getting rid of the EFOs. So again, this is 40% at Aliso, 60, maybe slightly less EFOs, 80, slightly less EFOs, and I'm able to reach the 80. If I allow Aliso to go to 100, even during those 5 repetitions, I'm not able to fill Aliso, and I'm also getting those EFOs. So at this point, I'm reaching the conclusion I can't maintain 90% at the non-Aliso fields. I have to allow more withdrawal capacity from those fields if I want to reduce the use of Aliso. So I'm going to go into the findings here from this first batch of results. The feasibility assessment shows that maintaining 90% inventory level in the non-Aliso fields over the course of the winter will result in more curtailments, because basically those EFOs signals that I have to curtail, and there may not even be a 1 in 10 day. Will result in more curtailments or EFO, even with the full use of Aliso Canyon. This is true regardless of the assumed pipeline capacity. I probably need to correct this, because I haven't tried all pipeline capacities. I tried between 2.7 all the way to 3.1. Maintaining the non-Aliso feeds at a 90% inventory level, as assumed in the reliability assessment in Synergy, is not feasible, and it's starting actually to look contradictory with minimizing the use of Aliso. Again, here, however, I allow Aliso to be filled even to 100%, just not letting those fields drop below that and making use of them is not helping. And though I'm not showing the results, I'm saying similar results were absorbed if I let those fields drop to 70% or even 50% inventory levels, which I'm about to show next. So the next batch, so the previous batch, I was doing a sensitivity on the allowed maximum inventory in Aliso field. This batch, I'm fixing Aliso. So if you look at the very last bullet on slide 31, I'm allowing Aliso only to be filled to 60%. And I'm still looking at cold year, have a much more optimistic daily capacity of 3 BCF. I'm still looking at the more conservative case, upper standard deviation, 80% wells are available, and for the non-Aliso fields, maximum inventory allowed. And then I'm going to go show 5 levels, and those 5 levels were actually inspired or taken from the reliability assessment. So case 9, 90%, and that was the base case in Synergy. 70%, that was sensitivity 1 that Lisa Cosby showed us this morning. 50% was sensitivity 2. Again, we've seen that this morning. And instead of doing the 37, I just went with equidistant interval. So I did also a 30%, and then I did a 10%. So again, the 5 cases you're about to look at, everything is the same, except that I'm allowing the non-Aliso fields to drop to those levels that I'm showing here. So case 9, 90, case 10, 70, and so on. So this case here, I'm allowing Aliso to be filled to 60%, and I'm actually able to reach that target. The non-Aliso fields are allowed to fill to 100, that only drop to 90%. And I'm still seeing those EFOs. So the next trial, now you can see instead of dropping only to 90%, the non-Aliso fields, now I'm allowing them to drop to 70%. You can see immediately I'm using less of Aliso, even though I'm required to maintain the 60%. If you look here at the span of how much I used in this case on slide 32, I went from 0.6 down to 0.2, which means I used 40% of the gas in Aliso. If I go into this case here, just allowing the non-Aliso fields to drop to 70, I'm starting to see less use of Aliso. So I'm dropping from 0.6 now to 0.3, so 30% of Aliso instead of 40%. But again, I'm required to maintain this inventory to get the higher withdrawal capacities. Now I go to the 50 minimum levels in the other 3 fields. I can see already I'm my minimum targets for PDR. This one I allow them to go to 30%, and then this one I allow them to go to 10%. So in each of those iterations, which I try to locate on top of each other like this, you can see there is less use of Aliso if I allow those fields to drop. I'm also getting a better handle on the EFOs. So here I had a lot of EFOs. They're starting to drop, as I see. And until here, I'm seeing maybe 3 EFOs per year. So obviously, this has a better effect on reducing the number of EFOs. And while I'm doing this, I'm also keeping track of the minimum inventory levels and see if I'm able to meet them as instructed by the reliability assessment. So I'm going to make a stop here before going into the next batch of results. I'm going to take questions regarding the 11 cases shown, so ideal, unfavorables, then sensitivity on Aliso, and then a sensitivity on the non-Aliso cases.
Thank you, Khaled. We do have a question from Edward Bedners, whose hand is raised. You are unmuted.
Okay, good. That clarified quite a few things. I have a better appreciation for the number of parametrics that you had to dig to get meaningful, useful results. So just a couple of questions. When you switched down from when you were manipulating the Aliso capacities, and then you jumped down to where you were manipulating non-Aliso, you switched your daily capacitor from 2815 to 3000. That was on slide 32. Actually, is there a particular reason for that?
No, I ran many cases, and
okay.
I ran many cases, so I have all of these, but I'm showing here the 3000.
I got you, but then they're comparable, yeah. So that's no problem. Same thing. So on the wells, the 80% and 85%, is that sufficient to be able to make all of the target maximum withdrawals and injections? Or did they limit?
Oh, say the question again.
You limited to 80% of wells available.
Yeah.
Around. So that's enough to make maximum injection and withdrawal rates?
Yeah, that's basically taking those rates by 80% to 80%. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, and so, yeah, I see what you're going after then. So then you other cases at other daily capacities, and we're about to start taking a look at some of those?
Yeah.
Okay, good examples. Thank you.
We don't see any additional questions.
Okay, let's move on. So at this point here, I actually realized I won't be able to look at those many results. I mean, I have many cases, I have many independent parameters. I'm looking at those EFOs, and I visually can't confirm what is the best case scenario or what can we do. So here I'm saying 3 EFOs, 5 EFOs, 1 repetition, I'm not seeing EFOs. And I know I'm only doing 5 repetitions of year 2020, and that's not statistically enough. So at this point, I go on what I call a parametric study, or you can call it a sensitivity study. So instead of starting to look at visuals and track the inventories like I'm doing, I'm going to run that model multiple times. And I'm going to vary 4 independent parameters. So within that model, I'm going to vary the pipeline capacity between a certain range I'm about to show on the next slide. We're on slide 39, by the way. I'm going to vary the well availability. I'm going to vary the non-Aliso minimum inventory. I'm going to vary the Aliso maximum allowed inventory. And instead of looking at plots, I'm going to start to look at those dependent parameters that I know now that are useful. I'm going to look at the average number of EFO days. So how many days on average was an EFO triggered? I'm going to also look at the demand on those EFO days, which is a very important parameter also. I'm going to also look at the volume of the imbalance. So how much imbalance was there on those days the EFO was triggered, or there was no sufficient capacity to meet the demand. And I'm doing all this analysis on a cold year. So I'm reminding everyone with the statistics of the cold year on the left, on the right. So 15 days above 4, almost 30 days up between 3.5 and 4. Then the total above 3.5 is 45 days. So here is the ranges. Here are the ranges I decided to look at. On the left are the independent parameters. So I'm going to vary the pipeline capacity between 2.7 BCF and 3.1 BCF. And the reason I picked this range, 2.7 BCF, it's close to what SoCal offered in their open BTS season. They're actually offering 2.715. 3.1 is on the higher end, and it matches what we have in the reliability assessment. But when we designed the framework, we said the reliability assessment takes into account only unplanned outages, and we have to account for planned outages in the feasibility. So it follows the capacity assumed that the feasibility study should be less than that in the reliability. However, I'm still keeping that upper bound of 3.1 just to see what effects it will have on the results. So I'm doing increments of 100. So I'm doing 2.7, 2.8, 2.9, 3, and 3.1. So those are 5 values for the pipeline capacity. The wells availability, I tried 60, 80, and 100. So these are 3 permutations on the wells availability. Non-Aliso minimum inventory, I know for sure the 90% is not useful anymore. So I'm doing 20% increments. So I'm doing 10, 30, 50, and 70. Aliso, I know I need at least 40%. So I'm starting with the 40% and then doing a 60 and 80 and 100. And this time, because I want a statistically convergent result, instead of doing 5 repetitions of 2020, I'm doing 50 repetitions of year 2020. So in the end, I have 240 cases to look at and see what I can conclude from that. On the right are the dependent variables based on which I'm going to decide whether a certain case is better than the other, or how I can decide on an inventory for Aliso Canyon. So I'm going to look at the number of EFOs or imbalance days that were triggered. I'm going to look at the demand on the days the EFO was triggered in MMCFD. Again, I'm going to look at the volume of the imbalance. And now because I have 50 repetitions, I'm going to average all those 3 parameters, all 3 dependent variables over those 50 repetitions. And we're now on slide 41, but of course, due to visuals, I can't show the 240 cases. So I'm selecting here a subset of cases to show. So I'm going to show 4 pipeline capacities and 4 levels of Aliso Canyon, so 16 cases. So I'm going to show pipeline capacities from 2.7 to 3. So these are my 4 variations on the pipeline capacity. I'm going to show you Aliso max inventory levels varying between 40 and 100, so 4 levels. So that gives me the 16 cases that I'm about to show you. I'm going for a cold year. I'm going to show you 80%, though I ran the 60% and 100%. I'm going to also make the call here and allow non-Aliso fees to be dropped to 30% and show you the results for that. So look at this slide. And why is that my old slide? Okay. All right. I know the slide is a bit dense. I tried to enhance it on my file, but it's not showing here. Okay, so this graph took me a while to design it in Tableau. It's designed for you to go from the bottom axis. So I need everyone to look only at the bottom set of data. So the bottom bar chart. And if you look at the left, this is the Aliso Canyon allowed maximum inventory. On the x-axis on the very bottom, you can see a number here. The very first number is 174, 170. That's actually the case number corresponding to the data I'm about to show. And then the bar chart on the very bottom shows you what was the allowed inventory, maximum inventory in Aliso. So if I look at case 174, I have 1, which means I allowed Aliso to be filled to 100%. If you look at case 170, I have a 0.8 here, which means I allowed Aliso to be filled to 80%, and so on. The colors are coded by the pipeline capacity. So if you look at the legend on the top right, we have a capacity of 2.7 in blue, 2.8 in orange, 2.9 in red, and 3 in cyan. So if you look again at the chart, the very bottom bar chart, all the blues are on the right. So these are the 2.7 case, the oranges are the 2.8, and the red are the 2.9, the cyan are the 3 BCF per day. So these are the 16 cases I'm about to show, 4 levels, 4 allowed levels for Aliso, and 4 assumed capacities on the pipeline. Now, if I go to, let's forget about the second and the third bar plot, I'm going to show you the bar plot on the very top, which is one of the important metrics I'm looking at. So on the very top, you're looking at the average demand on the days when the EFO was triggered. So let's say I'm looking on the very right here of that bar chart, the blue, and I'm seeing a number on top of the bar. It's 3754. So that tells me that on average, the demand on the days when the EFO was called or I got the imbalance, the demand was this much, only 3.7 BCF. If I move, for example, to case 78, which I have encircled in red here, that basically tells me that on the days the EFO was triggered, on average, the demand was 4.8. And the reason it's on average is because I have 50 tracers of year 2020. So the top bar tells me what was the demand when the EFO was triggered. The one below it, which would be the second from the top or the third from the bottom, if you look on the axis, this is the average volume of the imbalance of the EFO. So that number here is still in BCF, and what was the amount of imbalance on the days the EFO was triggered. So again, if I look at the case on the very right, case 30, when the pipeline capacity was 2.7, the average imbalance was a half BCF, 0.5159. If I look at case 22, almost the same, 0.5195 BCF, so on and so forth. If we grab one of the milder case, so case 174 on the very left, so the average volume of the imbalance was only 278 mmCF. So to recap on what I just said, the bars on the very bottom, this is the allowed maximum in Aliso Canyon. The colors on all the 4 bar plots is for the capacity. The bar plot on the very top, this is the average demand when an EFO was triggered. The second bar plot from the top, this is the average amount of imbalance. And then there is this one that I haven't discussed yet. So the second from the bottom, this is the yearly average number of EFOs. If I had ran only one number, I would expect to see integers here. So either 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. But because I'm averaging over 50 repetitions of 2020, I'm actually getting fraction of days. So I'm starting to look at this data. I'm wondering what would be an acceptable level for an EFO. And that's all in the models. We're by no means saying that SoCal can allow an EFO on their system. But from a modeling perspective and with the amount of assumptions and simplifications that we have, do I really need to hit a 0 target on DFOs, or is there one not that conservative? So you can see on the very left, for case 174, the number of EFOs is 0.04. That means among the 50 repetitions of 2020, I probably had only one EFO. And then if you look at case 170, it's 0.08. That means I had 2 EFOs when I repeated the year 2020. So is my design, should my design aim for an EFO of 0? And for your information, when I ran a capacity of 3.1, I was actually able to reach an EFO of 0. But we're thinking, after looking at this result, this is actually too reliable, because if you look at the average demand when those EFOs were triggered, they are consistently above the 5 BCF. So if you look at the bar on the very top, for the 5 cases on the left, so case 174, case 170, 126, 120, 166, the average demand when the EFO was triggered is 5 BCF or more. And we know we're already designing the system in terms of reliability for 5 BCF. So we can't ask the feasibility to have a higher level of reliability at this point. But again, if you look on the right, where I have this black vertical line, the EFOs were triggered on days where the demand was less than the 5 BCF. And of course, the worst case scenario, when I had a capacity pipeline, the blue cases, when I had only 2.7, I'm triggering EFOs all day long. It's 40 EFOs at an average of 3.7 BCFD. And then you have the cases in the middle where things are a bit milder. So in terms of modeling, again, this is not something we expect to see in terms of operation. We think that unacceptable levels of EFOs would be what is shown on the left of the vertical black line. So cases 166, 122, 126, 170, and 174 would be an acceptable scenario or parameters for the non-Aliso and the Aliso levels. On the right, that's an acceptable level of EFOs. I'm going to try to make better visuals on the next slide. So I'm moving to slide 43. So looking at the same plots, but I'm just focusing on one of the capacities for the next 3 slides. So slide 43 is for the 2.8. Slide 44 is the 2.9 capacity. Slide 44 is the 3 BCF capacity. I'm not even going to show the 2.7. 2.7 is completely not feasible, even with the full use of Aliso. So again, I look at the 2.8, and I'm highlighting here the bars that are in orange, because this is the capacity that I have, 2.8 daily capacity. And then I'm seeing that no matter what the allowed inventory in Aliso, so case 66, I allowed Aliso to fill to 40%. Case 70, I allowed Aliso to fill to 60. Case 74, I'm allowing Aliso to fill to 80%. And case 78, I'm allowing Aliso to fill to 100%. And then if you look at the very top bar, you see that the average demand on the days when the EFO was triggered keeps getting bigger and bigger. So for case 66, it was 4.2. For case 70, it's 4.395. Case 74, I have Aliso at 80%. I go to 4.6 BCF. And then case 78, the average demand on the EFO days was 4.8. And again, if you look at the number of EFOs, which would be the second plot from the bottom, so you can see at 40%, you're getting 13.74 EFOs. At 60% Aliso, 7.56. At 80%, it's 3.44. At 100%, it's 1.8. And all those numbers are on the right black line that I drew there to see what is acceptable and unacceptable. So just by looking at this plot here, I'm saying the minimum acceptable level for Aliso is 100%, which means if this is the pipeline capacity, 2.8, I need at 2.8, I need 100% of Aliso for this cold year to be feasible and maintain the minimum levels of reliability. If I go to the next slide, now I'm showing if I increase the pipeline capacity to 2.9. So now I have a few bars, colored bars on the right of the vertical line, what it says unacceptable, and then I have a couple of bars where it says acceptable. So again, I'm highlighting cases 126, 122, 118, and 114. These are in red. And again, those are the four cases of Aliso inventory. One case I'm allowing it to 40%, which is case 114. One case I'm allowing it to 60%, which is case 118. One case I'm allowing it to 80%, which is case 122. And then in case 126, I'm allowing it to fill all the way to 100%. So again, you see the same trends. The more you allow of Aliso, the higher the demand when an EFO is triggered. So we have two cases of Aliso where it's not acceptable on the right. So what this basically tells me that at 2.9, 40% Aliso and 60% Aliso is not acceptable, is not feasible. 80% or 100% is feasible, with 100%, of course, providing you with the less chance of EFOs. And this last slide, again, it's repetition, but now I'm showing what would happen if I assume a pipeline capacity of 3. Now I have 3 levels of Aliso where it's acceptable and 1 level of Aliso what is unacceptable. So 40% is unacceptable, but the other 3 cases are acceptable, which leads me to say that if the pipeline capacity is at 3, then the minimum I need from Aliso is to allow it to go to 60%. So again, I'm showing only 16 cases. Of course, I brought the results for various cases. So here I was showing 80% wells. I looked at the 60% cases. I looked into allowing the non-Aliso fields to drop to 10%. I haven't seen much change. So just for simplicity and the audience, I'm only showing the result here for those cases. So again, the summary of findings from the parametric study, the first 3 bullets, I'm fixing those for the table I'm about to show. So 80% wells availability year-round. Non-Aliso fields are allowed to drop to 30%, and I'm still looking at a cold here. And I'm summarizing the previous 5 slides that I showed you. So at 2.7, I'm saying we need at least 100 from Aliso. At 2.8, we still need 100 from Aliso. At 2.9, we can need less of Aliso, so 80%. At 3 BCF per day, we need only 60% of Aliso. And I have 3.1 here stricken out because that's not going to meet the minimum levels that we obtain from synergy modeling or from the reliability assessment. Not to mention that it assumes no planned outages on the system. So again, based on your selection of the pipeline capacity, we have a recommendation for the maximum allowable percentage in Aliso based on what you assume for the pipeline capacity. So the last slide here, it's a bit more dense too. I was trying to provide a sense of what would be the risk ratio or how much more reliability would you get if you allow Aliso more than what we are recommending based on the pipeline capacity. So on the right, this is the same plot. I'm just grabbing 60% of Aliso, and I'm showing the 3 cases on the right. So for pipeline capacity of 2.7, 2.8, and 2.9, which is the cyan, the blue, and the red. I'm showing here on the very right, that text box, EFOs were triggered on days when the demand was less than 5 BCF. So i.e. possible curtailments on days when the demand is below that of 1 in 10 days. And that's why at those levels, we can't recommend Aliso of 60%. However, if you go into the orange or the green, we can start thinking about lesser capacity. So I'm summarizing that on the left, this table here. So let's focus, for example, on a daily capacity of 3,000. So on a capacity of 3,000, we're recommending an inventory level in Aliso, a maximum inventory level at 60%. And that's going to result in 0.46 EFOs on average per year. And the question that I was asked by the gas reliability team, so what would happen had Aliso been allowed to go all the way to 100%? And then the response is in the third column. That would have actually bring the number of EFOs down to 0.04. So the ratio here between the EFOs is pretty high. So you gain more from Aliso. It's about 11.5. Another case to look at here is the 2.7 case. It was a very nice case to have in the parametric study, actually. So if I have Aliso at 60%, I'm triggering 42 EFOs. If I have Aliso at 100%, I'm still triggering 42 EFOs. And of course, the conclusion I'm showing here, the daily capacity is actually so low that even Aliso won't help. And that's probably, I showed that in one of the cases. I wasn't able to fill Aliso, and Aliso was depleted at that level. So if we reiterate, for example, for 2.9, so 2.9, we're actually recommending, I think, an 80%. So at 2.9 daily capacity, you can see here the number of EFOs at 60% is 1.84, which we term unacceptable. But if you go to 100 Aliso, you get only 0.16, and the EFO ratio here is 11. So again, you're gaining from Aliso going from 60 to 80 this much, to 100%, sorry. Once the pipeline capacity reaches 3.1, there is not much gain from allowing Aliso to go from 60% to 100%. The EFO ratio, which can be a surrogate for the risk ratio, is only 1.5. So this would be the final result from the parametric study. Depending on how confident we are of the pipeline capacity, that would be the recommended maximum allowed percentage in Aliso. So summary of findings, I'm going to recap on the first batch of results when I was showing graphs of the inventory tracking. So maintaining the non-Aliso fields at 90% is not feasible, and it's contradictory to minimizing the use of Aliso. The reliability assessment showed that at 90% non-Aliso level, withdrawal from Aliso were required, which was corroborated by the feasibility assessment, despite its simplicity and the assumptions. The feasibility assessment shows that maintaining 90% inventory level in the non-Aliso field over the course of the winter will result in more curtailments, EFOs, even with the full use of Aliso, i.e. the 68.6 PCF. And similar results were observed for the 70 and the 50% cases. Therefore, allowing the non-Aliso fields to drop to 30 or even 10% throughout the winter is the feasible result, which, however, in turn requires a higher withdrawal capacity from Aliso Canyon. The parametric study findings. So the parametric study covered 240 permutations. We were varying the pipeline capacity, the wells availability, the non-Aliso minimum levels, Aliso maximum inventory level. And then based on those assumptions that I showed you, 80% wells availability, and allowing the non-Aliso fields to drop to 30%, we're making the following conclusions. So an Aliso Canyon maximum inventory level of 60% is feasible and will maintain the minimum required withdrawal capacity for a 110 peak day, but only if the pipeline capacity during a cold season, or at least cold days, is maintained at 3 BCFD or higher. And we're going to see later, maybe from the discussion, that this would require 285 MMCFD of interruptible capacity to be brought through the southern zone. If you increase Aliso to 80%, that would decrease the need for this interruptible capacity. If you increase Aliso all the way to 100, that will obviate the need for this interruptible capacity during a cold year. And that brings up to questions regarding the parametric study.
Thank you, Khaled. We have a question from Marcel Hawiger, who asks, how does your quote unacceptable end quote criterion of 1 EFO correspond to historical occurrences of EFOs, and why did you select 1?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Let me bring this slide. The first slide where I presented this. So at the very beginning, when we started modeling this, we know there are levels of OFOs before triggering EFO. So I actually wanted to model the OFOs and then see if I actually get an EFO. And OFOs are stages. And once SoCal declares an OFO, the customers would respond in some way and may actually reduce the demand. So it would have been very complicated to include our speculations for the OFO on the pipeline system. So EFO is a surrogate, but in real life, I don't recall SoCal triggering an EFO. Like I said, first they trigger the OFOs, and there are penalties associated with those OFOs. So customers have the incentive to reduce their demand. So like I said, this is an idealization. And my first question was looking at this result, should I go to 0 EFOs? Because we can't allow EFOs on the network. That means curtailing and possibly on not on a 1 in 10 day. So this chart you're looking at, along with the other 224 cases, this is what made me decide that less than a 1 EFO is acceptable. Because if you look at the very top bar chart, on the left of this vertical line, the EFOs are triggered above 5 BCF. And again, our reliability standard wants us to maintain only a 5 BCF. I have this number here in the figure, 4.987 BCF. So if I trigger an EFO above what I need in the reliability study, that should be acceptable based on our standards. But if I trigger the EFO on days when the demand is lower than those 4.987, that this is problematic and shouldn't happen. And if it did happen, it should happen only once, not even once. It shouldn't happen. So does that answer your question? Let me look at the chat here.
Thank you, Khaled. The next question is from Andrew Sowen. Marcel says thank you. So Andrew's question is about slide 47. He asks, in the 2700 mmCFD capacity case, if Aliso at 68 BCF doesn't help anymore, would it help if Aliso inventory was increased beyond 68 BCF?
No, not really, because you're unable to fill Aliso at this level. And I think I've shown one case here similar to that. At 2.7, you just don't have enough capacity to fill Aliso, but this is also for a cold year. You might be able to do it on an average year, but for a cold year, I'm not seeing you fill Aliso at 2.7. And then look here at the average demand for a cold year. The average demand for a cold year is 2.7. So if you have a 2.743, if you have a 2.7, you're actually bringing in less gas than what you need for the whole year. So there is no way you're going to end up with more gas by the end of the year. You're going to end up with less gas in your inventory. So what this slide tells me, like, Aliso is not helping at 2.7 and lower. It's already too bad on the pipeline.
Thank you. The next question is from Edward Bednars. You are unmuted.
Well, I'm even more impressed because I think your permutations of about 250 cases by the time you put in your EFO thresholds multiplied quite a bit. That was a useful way to filter out and try to illustrate what you were working with, especially now that I understand your 5,000 mmCFD supply trigger. So following along with these and looking at the capacities that you're working with, come to the table on 46, slide 46. So if I can get the interpretation correct here, that if SoCalGas is in 2020 offering 2715, that says you have to have 68.6 in Aliso. Is that correct? BCF? To avoid the...
Based on the assumptions that I'm showing, yes.
Right. Okay, I'm not saying final conclusion with your assumption, we haven't looked at the practicality of the sequencing of the storage fields or anything else. I got you. That okay. And then, I certainly agree with the 3100 planned outages. That's not practical at all. Then also, as far as your EFO criteria, I don't think that you really did come up with a hard criteria because you immediately on slide 47 did provide some data about how you could look at other thresholds if you wanted to. But I understand now 5,000 limits you to being able to do that. Now, also, you made a comment that your EFOs, that you were using an EFO to account for just about any shortage. Were you looking at other inabilities to reach supply, or was this you were trying to limit the cases you looked at?
Can you rephrase the question? Was I trying to limit the EFOs?
No, I saw that you had said at the beginning, you said you were using EFOs to account for the ability to supply.
Yeah.
You didn't look at other failures to supply. You just focused on EFOs?
I focus on the imbalance, yes, because we're doing a mass balance every day. So my only criteria is whether I met this balance or not.
All right. So you're just looking at the EFOs. Then the other thing coming up on the 80% wells, and I'm not familiar with wells and the requirements for them. I know you had to limit down the number of permutations you did. What made you decide 80% was the one you wanted to present here?
So we're looking at the shut-ins as per CalGEM, and shut-ins for every storage field is 2 weeks, twice a year. So you have every field almost out of service 4 weeks of the year. So this 4 weeks out of the 52, this is around 7 to 8%. Okay. And then they have the SIMP work, which is the well retesting, I think, according to CalGEM too. And each well has to be tested every 2 years. And I believe it takes them between 1 to 9 weeks to do that for each well. So now we have another 4 weeks for each well where it's out of service. So that's another 8% or 9. Add that to the 7 from the shut-in, and then 80% could be a reasonable number, not to count the unplanned outages on the wells or whatever.
Okay, so it's a reasonable number. If anything, it's going to be a little
lower. Yes, maybe at 75. But anyway, between 75 and 85, I'm not seeing a lot of change in the results. I mean, the big effects come if I assume 100% wells availability. Then maybe I can change some of my recommendations. But 75 to 85, I don't think much will change.
Okay, that seems reasonable. Other than that, I don't see any serious issues with what you did. I certainly understand all the assumptions you had to make to do it. And yeah, there's certainly some uncertainty in here. Actually, I've got to be honest with you. This is the first analysis I've seen that really did a sufficiently rigorous look at exactly what kind of uncertainty ranges you were working with. So that was good to see by going stochastic and you're looking at your delta distributions. So
yeah, thank you. My whole point was trying to get a forecast for the whole year, which, like you said, I haven't seen it before.
Yeah, and I was worried when you started talking about 5 grabs off of a 365 data set, but when you went to 50, I felt a lot better.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
My main comments. Looks good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is from Dr. Issam Najam. Dr. Najam, you're unmuted.
Thank you. Just to set the stage for this analysis, you basically assumed a cold year and you assumed the upper 95th percentile of the standard deviation. So you maximize the level of demand and the stress on the system. And so when I go to the range of supply that you had 2.7 up to 3.1, but you did not present anything from 3.1 BCFD. And then in your slide 46 that you have up there, you sort of discount it because you say assumes no planned outages on the pipeline system. Do you think that in a severe cold year, it is unreasonable to say that planned outages would not be implemented during that high demand period?
Hi, I can jump in. This is Jean. I just want to note that a lot of the planned outages are due to compliance work that are on compliance deadlines. So even in a cold year, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily expect planned outages in the middle of winter, but even in a cold year, there would have to be compliance work done. So it's not likely that you could go a whole year without doing any pipeline maintenance.
You know, just recently you allowed them to make a change in their work schedule because of demand issues that they needed to do, and that was just fine. So let's not have a theoretical discussion. I'm saying in a severe case like this, it is not unreasonable to say that unplanned outages can be held off And even that results in 27 BCF at the field, which is lower than the maximum that they have now. So at the current 34 BCF, if they bother to fix their pipelines to the capacity that they're supposed to be, that volume is plenty sufficient for your cold year and upper level 95th percentile standard deviation.
So I just want to clarify that maintenance is often postponed in the short term due to severe demand, but there are, federal and state compliance obligations that are on a timeline that can't be postponed.
As a follow-up to that, Edward Bedners asks, but wouldn't that need to be true for 365 days a year, not just when it gets cold?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
I just unmuted him if you want to clarify, Mr. Bedners.
No, I understand the fact of relaxing, and I'm making sure I understand this analysis. In order to maintain the storage and use it, you'd have to have no planned outages for 365 days for a couple of years in a row from the way you had to fill the storage. Is that correct, Colin?
Yeah, but at any rate, I'm not exceeding the injection capacity. So if you look at any of this cold year, how much was it that you need?
No, I was talking about the fact that there could be a decision made to not have planned outages, but it's not just for a month or two that you'd need the access. You'd have to have that filled for over 365 days on no planned outages.
I would say at least for the winter and maybe a couple of months around the shoulder months, yes.
Okay, a few months.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I understood. Thank you.
But even if you brought 3 in the summer, you might not be able to inject everything. So in the end, you need to bring that number I'm showing on this slide, here, slide 18. You need to bring 1,004 BCF plus almost 100 BCF to fill your storage. That's what you need.
Thank you. Norman Peterson has a question. He's asking, all other cases assume varying levels of firm pipeline capacity, correct? If correct, why do you assume 285 mmCFD of interruptible capacity on slide 49? Why is interruptible allowed at all?
Well, if I understood the question correctly, why I'm allowing 285 on interruptible capacity? Can you read the question again, Christina?
Yes. All of your cases assume varying levels of firm pipeline capacity, correct? Mm-hmm. If correct, why do you assume 285 mmCFD of interruptible on slide 49? Why is interruptible allowed at all?
Well, when I did the parametric study, I explained why I take those levels. So 2.7 was right below what SoCal offered in their open season. 3.1, what was used in the reliability. At this point, I still wasn't looking at even the open BTS. I didn't know what SoCal was offering. So I did those, but then if you compare that to what's being offered in the open season, you realize that if you want to maintain 2,900, you need to bring 285 on interruptible capacity. I mean, I'm presenting the results here for stakeholders to weigh in and for the gas reliability. So again, this table here is the result of the modeling. If you assume this, then you pick that level for Aliso. And SoCal, in the open season, they say that the 2.7 is for a certain demand configuration, and in some, if the demand is higher, they might be able to bring more, and that's why we have the other levels, the 2.8, 9, and the 3. I hope that answers your question, Norman. So I'm not assuming anything. I'm just comparing what I have here with what's in the open system.
Mr. Peterson has his hand raised. Mr. Peterson, you're unmuted.
Thank you, Christine. Very, very interesting, Khalid. Congratulations on coming up with a lot of information. The reason I was asking about the 285 MMCFD is we're aiming at a cold service during a cold year, and I thought where we were going is we were trying to provide service for the cold year through facilities that would be available on a firm basis. And so if that's true, then are you coming out saying that if we're going to have SoCalGas offering only 2,715 MMCFD of firm capacity in the open season, and interruptible capacity is something you can't assume you're going to be able to use, then what we need to do is have Aliso Canyon use at a maximum inventory of 68.6 BCF. Is that where you're coming out?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say, just if I could interject a little bit here, I think that's one of our questions. What we see is as you say, the 2.7 is confirmed. However, there is more capacity on the southern system that does become available when it's a high demand day. So there is a bit of there's a bit of a gray area there where on cold days, we do see a lot more coming through the southern system than 2.7, that makes the system total greater than 2.7. So that's one of the things we would like people to consider in their comments is what is it reasonable to assume? So if you want to elaborate your thoughts on that, we'd love to see that in the comments.
Okay, Gene, I'm sorry, I missed some of what you were saying there. You're saying that under cold day conditions, more firm capacity is available. SoCalGas only offered the 2,700 open season.
Not firm capacity, but more just capacity is available, including the interruptible. We didn't make it the firm capacity a constraint, although we do acknowledge that I think it's 2715 is the firm capacity that was offered. But there is the potential for more to come through the system when demand is high. So that is why we kind of have this range here. Well, it's one of the reasons we have this range here, is because it's not a cut and dry black and white answer, which is the correct pipeline capacity to assume.
So how do we square all of this with what we learned from SO5 this morning's simulation 5 for winter 2030, where it looked like where we were coming out is you could reduce LISO capacity from the current 34 down to 27. My mind is twirling around trying to reconcile what we've been through with Caleb and what we found out this morning, which I thought was very educational because it was a lot of new information in comparison to the July 28th conference for me. How do we square those?
Hey, Norm, I'd be happy to weigh in on this, and then I'm sure Hala might have some things to say as well. So basically, the analysis from this morning is what do you need to meet on that one cold day? How much inventory do you have to meet that one cold day? So you need to have 27 BCF in storage to meet that one cold day if the other fields are 37%. But we know that as the winter progresses, the capacity or the inventory in the field goes down. So you don't have to. We can't just think of what do we need on that one day because it's not going to stay at 27 all winter long. There's likely going to be withdrawals throughout the winter. So you need to have 27 still on the day that 1 in 10 peak day rolls around. And so what this feasibility study is intending to do is to say, okay, how do we make sure that we have enough total in inventory so that when that peak day does strike, we still have enough gas in inventory to cover it between the 4 fields.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Gene. And thank you again, Caleb.
Thank you, Norm.
Thank you. We have another question from Edward Bednars. On slide 19, did you say that the cold upper standard deviation numbers were similar to a recent year?
Hey, Khalid, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Yes, I forgot the mute button as usual. So slide 19, I'm showing almost 15 days above 4.5, above 4. And here, this is year 2013, we had 12 days actually above 4. So we're pretty close in that range. In the next range, we probably have a little bit more. But again, 2013 was not the coldest year. 2013 was 1,200 or 1,300 HDDs. The cold year is almost 1,600. All right, any more questions?
I don't see any further questions. Actually, Mr. Peterson, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. I just have a couple of others about some of the points of your presentation. I just didn't quite follow, Caleb, because I'm not a statistician. First of all,
neither am I.
Why do you have to take the year 2020 and repeat it 5 times in the case 24, et cetera? And each time you repeat it, you're getting different results. You're getting different scatters of EFOs.
Yeah.
It seems to me is it because you are somehow eroding the capability of the system each year?
So imagine you have for 1 month, you have a distribution, all right? And I'm selecting 30 numbers, which is the number of days in that month. Each time I select those 30, they are not going to be the same. Because I'm drawing from a distribution that has many, many, many more points. So each time I drew those 30 days, it's different. And that's why I get this subtle differences from one repetition to the next. And I think it perfectly mimics what happens in reality, because we can't tell for certainty what's going to happen in year 2020. And then to get something really statistically meaningful, you have to do that. Actually, I intended to do 100 years, but it would have taken a long time, so I'm doing 50. And then I have to average the data over those 50 repetitions. Does that handle a little bit your concern?
Pardon?
So imagine you have a container that has 100 numbers, and you have to draw 30 from it to simulate the month of January. Each time you draw those 30 is going to be different, but they're all going to be from the same distribution.
Aha. It's a matter
so I'm drawing 30 each month, 30, and then times 50 from basically withdrawing 1,500 times from each month, and then I'm averaging over those 1,500 times. That's in a very, very simple terminology.
Okay. And then on the histograms, this was my introduction to histograms. And I'm trying to get back to the histograms. Those were on.
You're cutting off, Norm. Or you have a lot of background noise.
There they are, the histograms. Good. The team has them up. Just so I can understand what the histograms are showing us, like you're showing numbers of days, but what's across the x-axis? You're showing send out. It looks like across the x-axis. And so this is just the histogram. Just shows the number of days that you have sent out at these different levels. 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 MMCFD. Is that all it's showing?
We call them bins, yes. If you look at slide 13, are you still seeing my screen?
Yes.
So if you look at slide 13 on the very bottom, I have a footnote there. It says bin width is 100 mmCFD. So each bar you see in the histogram is a bin, and each bin has a width of 100 mmCFD. So if you look at 2000, actually that would be the demand between 1950 and 2050, and then the number of days corresponding to it. And of course, I have the choice of how many bins I should have. I could have had only 5 bins here, but we didn't tell how the distribution looks like. So each bin is a certain demand range, and that range is 100 mmCFD, and then the y-axis is showing the number of occurrences or the number of days when this demand occurs.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Khalid.
So if I look at 2013, for example, here, Norm, and I have this red circle, so you can sum all the bins together. So between 4,500, you can see there is like 6 bins here. Probably the smallest one is a day, the next one is 2 days. So I can sum those together, and I can see from the range from 4 to 5, if you sum those bins, it's 12 days. So I can tell here there are 12 days between 4 and 5. Or I can just look at a single bin and say between 4.1 and 4.2, I had only 2 days.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you, Norm.
Thank you, and I think we can move on.
I'll hand it over to Christina from the Gas Policy and Reliability team. So we're gonna move into slide 51. Christina, all yours.
Thank you, Khaled. You can go ahead and go to slide 52. I'm Christina Lee, and I'm from the Gas Policy and Reliability team. We'll now be covering considerations to keep in mind when selecting a maximum inventory level. Energy Division staff recommends selecting a maximum inventory level. I'm sorry, someone is not muted. The Energy Division staff recommends selecting a maximum inventory level based on consideration of the following factors here on this slide, in addition to party input and the preceding record. First, consideration should be given to the risk assessment, which was just presented by Colette. How much risk of some curtailment is acceptable to stakeholders and decision makers? Next, consideration should be given to the unbundled storage program. According to the decision in SoCalGas's triennial cost allocation proceeding, also known as the TCAP, non-core customers do not have storage rights if there is less than 41.6 billion cubic feet of gas in Aliso Canyon. Now, if there's more than 41.6 BCF of inventory, then the additional inventory can go towards allowing non-core customers, which would include electric generators, to buy storage through the unbundled storage program. Now to the third bullet. Consideration should be given to the economic impact of Aliso Canyon's inventory. A lower maximum inventory increases the potential for higher costs. And the feasibility assessment that we presented today does not consider ratepayer cost impacts or other economic impacts presented during our previous workshops. Lastly, the decision process should consider SoCalGas's current system capacity of approximately 2.7 BCF of firm capacity and the likelihood of average pipeline capacity and utilization increasing. Now, I just wanted to point out this is not a comprehensive list of factors to consider when determining Aliso Canyon's maximum allowable inventory. However, Energy Division staff believes that these are very important factors to consider. Next slide, please. We are now on slide 53. Under the parameters defined in the feasibility assessment, Energy Division staff recommends a range of potential maximum allowable Aliso Canyon inventory levels. That is, staff recommends that the maximum be set at one of the following levels, keeping in mind factors described on slide 52, either to 41.16 BCF, 54.88 BCF, or 68.6 BCF. Whichever of these three levels is chosen, it would serve as the maximum inventory level until a phase 3 decision is adopted and implemented. Now, CalGEM's maximum authorized Aliso Canyon inventory is 68.6 BCF. As shown on this table here on slide 53, 41.16 BCF represents 60% of that figure, 54.88 BCF represents 80%, and 68.6 BCF is 100% of CalGEM's maximum authorized inventory. Aliso Canyon at 40%, which is not listed here in this table, is not recommended by staff because it is not sufficient to maintain reliability in a cold year. Additionally, Aliso Canyon at 40% would require an average pipeline capacity of 3.1 BCF per day, which is significantly exceeding the average pipeline capacity that we're seeing now in 2020. Each of these alternatives assumes a different average pipeline capacity, as you can see here in column A, and a different risk of curtailment. Column B contains the Aliso Canyon inventory level studied in the feasibility assessment, shown as a percentage of 68.6 BCF. Column C translates that percentage into an inventory amount in BCF. Column D contains the number of emergency flow order days forecasted. These are days that would occur during a cold year. And lastly, column E contains the average gas demand forecasted on those emergency flow order days. We can see that at 2,800 MMCF per day, 1.8 EFOs or emergency flow orders are expected when demand is actually below the 1 in 10 peak day demand of 5 BCF. At 2,900 and 3,000 MMCF per day, less than 1 EFO is expected when demand is at or above the 1 in 10 peak day demand. These are considerations and risks that will need to be evaluated along with the preceding record. With that, that sums up staff's recommendation. Thank you for your time, everyone, and I will now open it up to Q&A.
Thank you, Christina. We have a question from Dr. Najm. Dr. Najm, you're unmuted.
Thank you. On slide 52, does this PUC ever consider in its decision process the impact of that decision on the local community? And where does that enter into the thought process as you're making these decisions?
So I would say, yes, absolutely. The PUC considers the impact on the local community. And, stakeholders are welcome to present that perspective. But we also have to balance the impact on the local community with the impact on the system as a whole. And that's what the decision makers will need to weigh in the final decision.
Jean, you list 4 bullets on this slide. There is no mention of the impact on the local community. So how can you tell me that this is balanced against the impact on the local community?
This is analysis of the reliability impacts. The final decision will also take into account the record.
Thank you. The next question is from Sarah Sarah asks, the recommendations seem based on preparing for an unusually cold winter, but the NOAA is forecasting a winter with normal or above average temperatures in California. Are you considering that?
So again, we used 2020 as a model year, but this will be what the decision is going forward until it's superseded by whatever is decided in phase 3. And I think, so we can't be just looking at this as, well, what's going to happen in 2020? This is establishing a more long-term number, although again, it could be superseded by a decision in phase 3. So we do see average temperatures getting warmer under climate change, but we also see extreme conditions and variability increasing. So that's something we also have to factor in, because people are, as we've seen this summer, people are not, they don't take very kindly to any interruption in service.
Thanks, Jean. Catherine Elder asks if we can put back up our concluding slide.
Do you think we could return it to slideshow view so it's a little bit bigger? So I don't know if you're aware, Holly, but we no longer see your screen. Does someone else want to share their screen and bring up the slides?
I got disconnected. You want me to share the screen again? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, please share the screen again.
Okay, and which slide did we want to look at?
I think it was the table of results.
Okay. This one? All right, hold on, I'm sharing the screen. Screen 1. Okay. Can you guys see my screen? Slide 53.
Yes.
Hello?
Are there any additional questions, Christina?
I don't see any additional questions.
Okay, Donald, why don't we start wrapping it up then, and we'll allow another opportunity for questions once you're done wrapping it up.
Okay, well, I think we just, I don't have a whole lot to say. It was just basically thank you all very much for your help and participation in today's webinar, and I hope that we provided sufficient information or enough high-quality analysis in order to inform stakeholders as to the decisions and recommendations we're making going forward. Just again, thank you very much for following along. This has been an incredibly long proceeding and a whole lot of work to get to this point. And I just want to thank my staff and my team members and everybody around the energy division who put so much work into this. And yeah, frankly, I didn't have a whole lot written. I just wanted to, this is our chance just to highlight next steps. And I'll remind us that the next steps are November 17 is a workshop with our consultant regarding updates on the phase 3 effort. And we will and as far as work products you're going to see, we are putting out final analytical or analysis results reports for the economic modeling that we presented earlier, the production cost modeling, and all of this hydraulic modeling and feasibility analysis that we have performed and shown to you folks here. So yeah, you'll be able to see those announcements come out when they happen, and there's going to be time for you all to comment on those reports when they emerge. So again, just thank you very much for your time, and this has been a really informative time for us all. So back to you, Christina, if there's one more opportunity for questions or comments, that's what we do now.
I don't see any questions on my end. Christina, do you?
Yeah, I see one question from Jason Egan. He's asking, well, he appreciates the workshop and discussion and asks if Energy Division will be accepting informal comments on the workshop.
Hi, Jason. I think our preference would be, since we would really like to focus our energies on completing the report, that you hold your comments for the report, which will go into the record, and then your comments will go into the record as a whole. So if you would want to give us any feedback on that, you're welcome to, but that's sort of our position right now, because we are really pushing to get this out by the end of the year.
Thanks, Jean, and I don't see any further questions.
Okay, with that, I just wanted to remind everyone to keep an eye on their mailbox. We will be sending out information on a November 17th workshop. This is going to be the first workshop for phase 3 of this proceeding. And all materials that were presented today are on our website. If there are any other questions, you can email Aliso Canyon OII at cpuc.ca.gov. So thank you everyone so much for your time today.
And a huge thank you to the Energy Division team for all of their tremendous modeling work and effort to put together all of these slides and panels today. I really want to thank them. So good job, folks. And thank you to all the participants on the phone who patiently listened through all these slides and for your good questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.